episode number 025 of Something Else with Aria and not KJ. My name is Aria, and I'm joined as always by my favorite co host, the co host that adds the co most. It's nobody, because it's Something Else with Aria and not KJ. Now, before we're getting into our normal stuff this week, where we talk about Mid South Wrestling from 1982, there might be some of you out there wondering, wait, hold on a second. I listen to this show every single week. I'm that one person that does that. And I know for a fact that last week, when you did this show, it was episode number 022. How on earth did you skip 2 episodes? Well, somebody listening on another platform, that was not the only show I did last week. In addition to that, in case you haven't listened to it yet, last Saturday, I did the live, LIVE, as it happened, play-by-play of both the men's and women's Royal Rumble matches. That is now up. Everything from Cody Rhodes and Gunther to Rhea Ripley to Asuka to Nia Jax jumping the bell, everything that you could possibly want while talking about last Saturday's Royal Rumble. And here's where it gets funny, of course, because, we did talk about the Royal Rumble in full, beginning to end. But what did I not talk about? Because the main event wasn't either Royal Rumble match. The Royal Rumble was main evented by Roman Reigns and Kevin Owens, and they had an all right match. They actually had a pretty decent match. Problem, of course, being that nobody thought that Kevin was going to win. And everyone was right. Kevin didn't win. They did do a spot that gave you like a second where you thought maybe, just maybe, but nope, that was that. Roman wins. And then afterwards, we got the big angle where finally Sami Zayn turned on the bloodline. Sami asked Roman to stop the aftermatch assault on Kevin because they had handcuffed him to the ropes. They super kicked him repeatedly. Roman decided that he was going to lay him out with a chair. And then when Sami asked him not to do that, he gave Sami the chair to do it instead. And, you know, it was fantastic. It was a slow build for months leading to this point because they've been doing this bloodline thing with Sami Zayn since June. Because you remember the Money in the Bank ladder match, Sami had vowed to win and then sit on the briefcase for a year and not cash in on Roman. And of course, nobody actually thought that that was something that would happen. And of course, it didn't. Nobody in their right mind saw this happening, where Sami got insanely over to the point that, people were strongly considering him winning the Royal Rumble and him getting the main event at a WrestleMania title match. And by the way, Sami Zayn did, of course, lay out Roman Reigns with the chair, and then he got beaten down by Jimmy Uso and Solo Sikoa. Jey Uso had walked out instead of taking part in it. And so now we're going to have to wait to see what the next thing that happens is on Friday on SmackDown. Does Jey Uso return to the bloodline? Pardon me, what happens from here? And so that's a question for the future. But, let's talk about the past, shall we? Let's go back 40 years ago, 40 years, 11 months, and 1 week to February 25th, 1982. We are here for Mid-South at the Irish O'Neill Boys Club in Shreveport, Louisiana. And let's kick it off here. We're going to play some audio of Boyd Pierce introducing this week's show with this week's special guest host, the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Mid-South Wrestling Television Network. I'm your host, Boyd Pierce, and we have a lot of exciting action lined up as matchmaker Grizzly Smith presents another outstanding card. It'll be headlined with the North American Heavyweight title on the line, Ted DiBiase, the current champion, defending against the former title holder, the Masked Grappler. Also, Paul Arndorff is here, Coco Samoa, Mr. Olympia, the Mississippi Heavyweight Champion, Bruiser Bob Sweetan, the Junkyard Dog, Brian Blair, and somebody else is here. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the greatest grapplers of all times in the ring, outside the ring, the American Dream, the Living Stardust, and he is our guest commentator of the week, Dusty Rhodes. Dust?
Well, boy, it's my pleasure to be with the Dean of Color. I mean, if you're talking about color, if you ain't got a color set, go out and steal one. You understand? Get one. Boyd Pierce, the Dean of Color commentator, Dusty Rhodes, American Dream, the Golden Boy of Mid-South Wrestling, here to commentate, to help you on the ins and outs. And there's a great match today between the Grappler and Ted DiBiase. When you got two champions, one current and one ex-champion, you always got to fight to the finish, and I'm looking forward to that. And I'm just ready to go, Jack, and I'm going to take my hat off so all the pretty ladies can see my $1 million smile on my face while we're going through this.
Thank you, Dusty. Let's go to the ring now for the introduction of the opening event.
Were we trying to get women to turn off the television? Oh well. So yeah, Dusty is there this week. Boyd's jacket has these giant roses all over them. You know, last week their flowers were so small it looked like there was blood coming down his jacket. But this week, big giant roses that stand out and everyone can see what they are. And Dusty tells the fans to steal a color television, which I don't think that argument will hold up in court. Excuse me, sir. Why do you plead? Well, I plead guilty, but it wasn't my fault. That damn dear Dusty Rhodes, he told me to steal a TV. And I imagine after the first, 100 or 200 people come up with that same excuse, the 201st person, the judge may be sick of it and just say, fine, we'll admonish Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream, the Living Stardust. Bring him into our courtroom here in Louisiana and Mississippi so we may admonish him for this. All right, so we go to our first match. It is Coco Samoa versus Larry Higgins. This week, Coco is a former Pacific Heavyweight Champion. Last week, he was the current Pacific Heavyweight Champion. So a lot happened in the last 7 days in the life of Coco Samoa. And Dusty Rhodes, I think, was getting paid by the word. We're just going to play 1 minute of his audio here before we come back. And, yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, Boyd, I'm a good friend of Coco Samoa. I know one thing. Coco Samoa is probably one of the fastest, quickest wrestlers in the ring today. The other boy there's got good size on. Don't know a lot about him, but you always see somebody like this come up, knock out Sugar Ray Leonard, knock out Muhammad Ali, knock out Harley Race and people like that, and Ernie Ladd and everybody. There's always somebody. See how strong he is and everything. Now, Coco's got to understand that he lacks a little bit in size, but in speed, he's quick as a cat, and he can get it done. I just like to congratulate, too, all the great amateur wrestlers around the country. Bill Watson's whole family's amateur wrestling, good friend of mine, and going all over the Mid-South area, sooner or later, we're going to get down to this summer probably where we're going to go in and have some of the kids and going to the schools and talking to them and everything, because it's what it's all about. You got to start somewhere. Amateur wrestling, boy, as you know, when you started commentating, being a great commentator that you are, and I started being a great wrestler I was, we had to start somewhere, and the kids are where we start. And right here, like you see, you're going to see a test of strength right here. I don't believe Coco has the strength that this big dude's got. This big guy got a lot of strength on him. Got some pretty boots on, too.
So that was Dusty saying about 15,000 words in 67 seconds. Somewhere in there, he did manage to talk about the match. In between the match, he was talking about amateur wrestling, dropped Bill Watts' name, mentioned Bill Higgins' pretty boots. Larry Higgins' pretty boots. I don't know who Bill Higgins is, but he's definitely not in this match. And Boyd, at this point, tries to cut him off and tries to slow it down. but apparently Dusty has a minimum number of words he is legally required to say this week, and he's trying to reach that quota by the end of the first match. At one point, and I'll play it here, I think Boyd just turns him out and stops paying attention to him. We'll play that here.
Oh, look at here, big old power slam. Yeah, throwing around like a sack of potatoes, Jack. I used to throw cast iron pipe when I was a plumber, son, just like that, boy. You know, you met me when I was a plumber, son.
I remember it well. There he used his knee, but coming back.
So, yeah, I doubt that Boyd had any idea what he was agreeing to at this point. Apparently, Boyd just agreed that he remembered back in the day when he was the plumber's son. And yeah, something just doesn't seem all right there. Okay, so we're gonna, there's a bit of a show-long storyline that ends up developing here. And it starts with our next match here. It's Paul Orndorff versus Frank Monty. I'm going to play the intro with Boyd Pierce, and I'll leave it going for a bit. And you can hear Orndorff screaming at Dusty Rhodes and Dusty's response to that.
Florida, former North American heavyweight champion Paul Orndorff. And in the blue corner at 236 pounds from Seattle, Washington, Frank Monty.
Frank Monty now getting his jacket, and you can hear Paul Orndorff making challenges over here to my sidekick, Dusty Rhodes, but he has a match in the ring right now against Frank Monty, and that'll give him plenty to worry about.
He's got a match with a tremendous athlete who he got a match with. You know, he better worry about Frank Monty. Conditioning, I know Frank's in the gym the other morning. I was out doing road work, and I know Frank that was on his way to the gym, and he's down there. He's always working out. He's always looking for an upset. Paul Orndorff is trying to say that he's the #1 wrestler in the state and in the country, and he's got to prove it a little bit more. You know, he's a great athlete. He was a great football player. Paul Orndorff see the moves that he's got. They both quick. We're watching now two guys that are in prime, great condition, and are super quick. And I just like to say real quick, a good hello to my old friend Ma Kelly down at Bendo's Truck Stop down by Turkey Creek, Louisiana. Came through there the other night, had a cup of brew with her. Say hello to Ma. Anyway, right here you're going to see Frank Monty now got the upper hand here, and Paul Orndorff. There he goes, Fireman Kelly. That's a nice go in there, get down to him. Frank countered it, got him down, and head scissors right up both of them. Look how quick they are.
Dusty takes one breath and lets out a stream that even the old cowboy himself, Bill Watts, would be proud of, as Dusty just randomly spits out a shout out to some random person and that no one's ever heard of, no one will ever hear of, and there we are. Boyd, after this, is trying to plug the North American title match, which is coming up next, but Dusty won't let him. Dusty talks about Mid-South airing in Istanbul. He turned it into a comment about Ted DiBiase's wife wouldn't kiss him because he was so ugly when Orndorff injured him. Orndorff wins with a power slam. I can't even comment on anything match-related, while Dusty is just off the rails here. It's like he's just, you know, if you ever heard him in WCW and thought that was bad, you haven't heard anything, my friend. So Orndorff wins here. Up next, it's the North American title match. Ted DiBiase defends against the Grappler. I gotta say, if Ted DiBiase looked ugly when Paul Orndorff injured him, he doesn't look incredibly attractive when he isn't injured, so maybe his wife isn't kissing him now either. All right, so up next, Boyd is going, our next bit of audio here, Boyd is going to try to get over the storyline of the Grappler, but Dusty Rhodes won't let him.
Instead, DiBiase injured the Grappler's leg tendons, and that's the reason that the Grappler says he has to wear this orthopedic shoe. Dusty Rhodes, it's a built-up shoe, but we know different. I've seen him use it for other reasons other than just because.
Well, Boyd, I've been in the ring with him. You know, I had a couple stitches in my noggin. Matter of fact, not a couple, about 12 from this man. Now, I know he's got letters from doctors and lawyers and Indian chiefs that's telling us that he needs that boot. But right now, he's got to worry more about probably the greatest pure young wrestler in wrestling today, Ted DiBiase. Ted's put on a lot of weight lately. He's quick, he's fast, and like I say, he is a great wrestler. This is going to be a great match.
And like we was telling you about that match in Monroe, Louisiana, but the masked grappler won over Ted DiBiase 1.5 years ago, and of course, in the period between, Ted DiBiase has re-won and regained that title, and now this is the rematch. In case some of the fans at home are wondering about the rematch, this is it. Grizzly Smith bringing it to them right here on Mid-South Wrestling Television Network.
So we have Dusty talking about how the grappler has letters from doctors and Indian chiefs saying that he needs his reinforced boot. Boyd just desperately trying to keep control of the commentary here. But Dusty is just overpowering with his commentary. And Grappler using a closed fist that the referee's admonishing for, while at the same time Dusty's screaming that he's blocking the referee so the ref doesn't see it. Which, yeah, he did. Just watch the show. Watch what's happening, Dusty. You'll see a lot of things. Grappler hits a swinging neckbreaker for a 2 count. He goes for another, but DiBiase hooks the ropes to block it. Ted makes his comeback, but Grappler loads up his boot and kicks DiBiase in the leg of all things. Grappler goes and loads up the boot again, but Ted this time blocks the blow and hits a back suplex for the pin. And Ted DiBiase is still your North American heavyweight champion. So, up next, we were scheduled to have a match with Bob Roop and Bill Ash. And I should note before I let Reese Bowden take this away, Bill Ash literally walks onto camera scratching his ass during the introduction. So let's go now to Reese Bowden, who's going to introduce the match and the ensuing angle that comes along with it.
One fall or remaining television time. In the red corner, at 252 pounds from Blacksburg, Virginia, Bob Roop.
As introduction of your next match, Bill Ash versus Bob Roop. Our first standby match.
Wait a minute. Just a second. Boyd Pierce, you're a very understanding man, commentator. I don't know what I have to do. I might have to go over Grizzly Smith's head to the president of Mid-South. But you see, last week, I wrestled Ricky Ferrer. Now, he's tough, but he's not in my class. And this week, they got me wrestling Bill Ash. Now, he's tough, but he's also not in my class. I'm a world-class competitor. Where is Junkyard Doug? He's running from me with his Louisiana title. Where's Ted DiBiase? He's running with his title. Dusty Rhodes, 2-time world champion. He's sitting here. He's not dressed to wrestle. He doesn't have to worry about me today. Where's the top people? I should be wrestling the top people in the country. Right here on the television, and I'm going to do something about it.
Bob, like I've told Skandar Akbar, and I'll have to tell you, we have nothing to do with it here at our television table. You'll have to take it to Grizzly Smith, the matchmaker.
Let me tell you something about Bob Roop. You know, Justin, we're talking about the people. I was in San Diego the other day, California, coming through from Japan, and this 2 weeks ago, and I happened to see Bob Roop talking about great talent and great people. I seen him get beat by the Junkyard Dog right on television in the middle of the ring. I mean, I seen him get beat.
Wait a minute. What did he say about me?
Hey, he don't have to tell you what he said. I'll tell you what I said. I seen you 2 weeks ago get beat my brother, Junkyard Dog, right on the TV while I was laid up on the beach in San Diego.
In San Diego?
That's it, baby. That's it. I seen you get beat.
Oh, you think you're safe because you're sitting here without your rust? You think because you're commentating you're safe, huh? You can run your mouth. You can put your mouth in my business. I'd have slapped your face, man. Why don't you come on and wrestle me? You got no guts? Come on, man, I'd have slapped your face.
What are you talking about? I ain't got no guts. What do you mean?
Let him go, man. Let him go.
He just badgering you know that you're pretty don't be a guest commentator and interfere. He just badgering you off.
dashed his dream as he left their table. He knew the consequences. We tried to warn him. He knew as he signed on. There comes Paul Orndorff for the knee. Going with that full Nelson. Bob Roop coming in. There's Dusty kicking him to the midsection. What in the world's going on? Dusty moves out of the way, and Roop cuts the knee on Paul Orndorff. Now the elbow, the bionic elbow, and Dusty Rhodes counts 1, 2, 3, signifying that he defeated Paul Orndorff out here on the cement floor. Here, ripping it. This is a match that's supposed to be between Bill Ash and Bob. Now he's choking him with his own shirt. Paul Orndorff taking his shirt, tearing it off the back of Dusty Rhodes. There's Bob Roop. Bill Ash coming out now. Both the referees. There he goes. With a shoulder breaker on Bill Ash. And now they're both on Dusty Rhodes. Bob Roop and Paul Orndorff in something that we've never seen before. Brian Blair, here they come, but the fallen Dusty Rhodes as he was attacked by Bob Roop and Paul Orndorff out on the cement floor. The match never got underway. While we try to cool things off and find out, we'll be right back after this word from Mid-South Wrestling.
Alrighty there. So, I mean, you heard what happened, but to give you a bit of a recap, so Roop is outside the ring. He doesn't actually get into the ring while Reeser is doing the introductions. He's just pacing around. He goes over to the announce table, disgusted that he has another enhancement match. He doesn't say those words, but he says that he has another match with somebody who isn't in his class. He wants to wrestle the top people in the country, and he's going to do something about it. Dusty starts talking about how Roop lost to the Junkyard Dog a few weeks ago, which pisses Roop off. Boyd is desperately at one point trying to stop Dusty, and he tries to mention the rules about being the guest commentator, which will come up here in a little bit when we go back to the ring. But eventually Dusty leaves the table. He gets attacked by Orndorff. At one point, they do a misdirection spot, and Roop accidentally gives a knee to Orndorff, and Dusty, you heard it, Dusty gave Orndorff the bionic elbow and made the cover while they're outside the ring and counted 3, so to give himself a win over Paul Orndorff here. However, both heels eventually double team Dusty. They rip his shirt off, which thankfully we were on a full shot. We were pulled back pretty far. We were zoomed out. Yeah, it was like Okada gave him a rainmaker, so it was that far back we were zoomed out. And eventually Bill Ash tries to make the save, but he gets laid out with a shoulder breaker, and Brian Blair and Mr. Olympia eventually run out and run off Bob Roop and Paul Orndorff. So that was a pretty nice little angle here to set up, honestly, and this is where it gets funny, it's setting up more Roop as a top guy or back in the top swing of things, because I don't think Dusty is around much after this here. I'm gonna look that up here. But yeah, a few weeks ago, a few months ago, they said that Dusty had signed an exclusive contract with Mid-South as his booking agent, and he is not long for the territory. And I don't know where that whole thing was supposed to go, but let's see here. I'm looking at the results right now on cagematch.net to see when the next time Dusty's even around. Let's see. He actually is around for a few weeks. And he's actually going to be in action next week. So what do I know? All right, so Dusty's around for a few more weeks. But, after a few weeks, it's not like he sticks around very long. After the next few weeks, he's gone until December. So don't get too used to the guy. It's all I'm saying here. Up next, and speaking of things that are wrong with this world, Mississippi champion Mr. Olympia in a non-title match against Ed Wiskowski. I have done something wrong with my life, because now I have volunteered apparently to watch weekly Ed Wiskowski matches. So after that last angle, Boyd is left by himself at the announce table. And he is going to recap what we just saw and ultimately explain the rules of the guest commentator, which, because I mean, you might be wondering, how do these people come out here? Because we've got Ted DiBiase, we've got Ernie Ladd, we had a few other people out here doing guest commentary while their hated rival is wrestling in the ring 20 feet away. And you might be wondering, why don't they do anything about it? Well, because there are rules in the way. And let's go to Boyd Pierce to explain what happened and what is probably going to happen to Dusty here.
Yeah.
The introduction of the next match, Mr. Olympia versus the Polish Prince, Ed Biskowski, Olympia, the Mississippi heavyweight champion. Now for Neely, and I'm glad it was Reeser Bowden that did the introduction because I lost my voice in all the melee a while ago as our guest commentator was ployed away by Bob Roop away from the table, and he was warned. I tried to warn him and caught him, but he lost his clothes as they jerked and tore the shirt off his back on the cement floor. He lost his pride, and he might possibly be subject to the $2,500 fine that is in the rules as our guest commentator, that no way they can leave our table to interfere in any match. And that's what Dusty Rhodes did. He just couldn't stand it, and Bob Roop ployed him away. So that'll have to be up to the Mid-South officials. But we lost our guest commentator as you saw him on the cement floor under the attack of the two men as he warded them off. And Bob Roop and Paul Orndorff strangling him with his own shirt as they tore it off of his back.
So I do have some fantastic news. And I know it has nothing to do with Dusty here or really anything regarding that angle at all. During that last 60 seconds, when you were listening to the dulcet tones of Boyd Pierce, I did some more research on CageMatch.net. Do you care that Ed Wiskowski's last match, at least for a while, at least for the rest of 82, is on March 12th? So here we are on February 25th. If I can get through the next 2 weeks, and I think I can, then I will be rewarded with no more Ed Wiskowski. Fingers crossed, ladies and germs. Fingers crossed. Grappler wins with a roll-up. Then we get our next match, and we're on our standby matches here. And technically, that's what the Bob Roop match was supposed to be, a standby match. Our next standby match is going to be Bob Sweetan versus Tony Torres. Both men are wearing their Chief J Strongbow singlet, and Sweetan, even to properly pay tribute to Chief J Strongbow, also has Jay's punch. Torres is no selling punches to the stomach, which ultimately led to nothing. It just meant that he's a bad wrestler. And Sweetan wins with a running knee drop. Okay. Now, before I tell you this next match, and this is our final match of the day, because, the show goes fairly quickly. But before I tell you this next match, I want you to keep in mind that this is the fourth scheduled standby match. In order, our great matchmaker, Grizzly Smith, decided that the order of the standby matches were Bob Roop versus Bill Ash, Mississippi champion Mr. Olympia versus Ed Wiskowski, Bruiser Bob Sweetan versus Tony Torres. And then, on the off chance that all three of those matches have decisions, or in this case, or in one case, just didn't happen at all, we're then going to get our fourth standby match. And I want you to think. Think about this. The most recent one that we just saw was Bruiser Bob Sweetan, who we only saw one other time last week in an enhancement role, versus Tony Torres, who I don't think we've seen at all yet. That was the last match we've seen. So theoretically, this match, the next one, the one that's here to, kill time, in theory, as stars beneath the level of Bruiser Bob Sweetan and Tony Torres. Can't guess who it might be? All right. So the match that only was scheduled to happen because Bob Sweetan and Tony Torres didn't go to a 14-minute time limit draw is a tag team match. as the reigning Mid-South Tag Team Champions, the Samoans, with General Skandar Akbar in their corner, against Brian Blair and the Junkyard Dog. So, yes, the fourth standby match features the number one babyface in the territory and two of the top heels in the territory. And this was there only if the prior match did not go to the time limit. I, they always say that, wrestling back in the day, it was airtight, brother. Stealing a line from Mike Mills there, good guy, great podcast, but it wasn't. Um, and this is one of those cases where it's like you can't even lie about it. You didn't like this match wasn't even promoted. They didn't say this was even a main event. They said the main event was the North American title match we saw earlier. This match was a bonus match that they threw out there or that they scheduled and told these guys, hey, if we have time, we'll get to you. And they had time. So Mike George is injured. Mr. Olympia already wrestled this week. So Junkyard Dog has his third partner in about 4 weeks with Brian Blair. JYD used what was called a tremendous wallop, which was Boyd's way of saying a punch to the face. Blair tagged in and pretty much immediately got cut off. Blair, by the way, is selling like a champ, and the girls in the crowd were screeching in a way that you do not hear in 2023. Nobody cares as much as these girls cared about Brian Blair getting his butt kicked in 1982. Blair crawled between Sika's legs and made the hot tag. Dog ran wild. The finish saw Akbar jump on the apron, and Dog hit the thump on Sika, but Alpha made the save. The ref took a bump while Dog worked on them 2-on-1. Akbar threw the referee into the ring post. Finally, Mr. Olympia made the save. Eventually, a shirtless man walked around the ring and woke up the referee and put him back into the ring. The referee saw Mr. Olympia, a man who was not in the match, hitting one of the opponents, and he called for the disqualification and gave the match to the Samoans because of Mr. Olympia's interference. The show ends as the shirtless man checks on Brian Blair. Boyd builds up the return of Iron Mike Sharp next week, and the show comes to an end. So that was a fun, easy to get through 42 minutes. If KJ was here, he probably wouldn't care for it. But I thought it was a good show. I enjoyed it. I really liked the angle with Bob Roop and Dusty Rhodes. I'm a Bob Roop fan. I know that he's a little dry for some people's taste, but I think that works for him. Because, he's an Olympic wrestler. He doesn't have Kurt Angle charisma coming out of his ears, but there's just something about him that's just detestable and in a good way. And that's how we like our heels in wrestling, are detestable in a good way. And, there's a lot of good stuff that's being built up here. And like I say, things start slowly. And we've had, this is our 25th show. So it's probably our 10th Mid-South that, we've reviewed. And it's, like I said, it's just a fun show to watch. It's a fun, easy 42 minutes. The show gets built up slowly. We've had 3 months of shows so far, and nothing feels stale, but it also feels like there's still more to come with each angle, with each storyline. We're not watching the Samoans wrestle Ernie Ladd every week. We're not watching, Bob Roop and Paul Orndorff beat on Ted DiBiase every week. It's, it's something that advances the show along every week, but it's not there to tire you out of it. You're left wanting to see more, which is not a feeling that you typically have watching modern day wrestling, where modern day wrestling, they throw everything at you for 2 or 3 hours a week. And when it's done, you're like, okay, I don't want to see any more now. So I give the show, I give it a 7 out of 10. It, in fact, I'd give it more. I give it a 7.5 out of 10. Great angle with Dusty. Yeah, Dusty took over the show in the first 20 minutes, but he had to get all of his words out because he was going to be taken out halfway through the show. Um, so we go from there to my favorite semi-regular segment. It is This Match Really Happened. And for this, we're going to WWE Monday Night Raw, June 26, 2006. It is the undefeated Samoan Bulldozer Umaga versus the Ugandan Giant Kamala with Kim Chi in his corner. Talk about like the epitome of a match that definitely really happened. It is Umaga versus Kamala in a match on Raw from free TV that got set up the night before at the Vengeance pay-per-view when Umaga was wrestling Eugene and Eugene had Kamala in his corner. And that led us to this match on this night, which in many ways, like, it's a skippable match. It's 2 minutes long. It's a squash match. Kamala got in like very little offense and just got his butt kicked here. They ran shoulders first into each other, and then Umaga gave Kamala a body slam and a kick to the chest before going outside the ring and beating up Kim Chi. I think Kamala, and I don't know this for a fact because I mean he had a lot of health issues a few years after this. Kamala never got off the mat, so I think there's a chance that he couldn't get up. And so they had the Brooklyn Brawler, Steve Lombardi, dressed like Kim Chi out there to take all these bumps. Umaga ran him into the post. He gave Kim Chi the running hip attack in the ring. And then he did a middle rope diving headbutt and a Samoan spike to Kamala and picked up the win in a match that it's sad, but it's what should have happened in 2006. Umaga was being built up to eventually take on Cena, and of course they didn't know this at this point, but he was being built up to eventually do WrestleMania and the Vince Trump angle, and it worked. It was what it was in 2006, 2007. So from there, it's time for our other favorite segment. It's Weird News of the Week. And that, of course, is Weird News of the Week presented by Nobody. Nobody, the company that sponsors nothing. And typically for Weird News of the Week, we sit down and we talk about, some random cute story that I find on the UPI website of an animal doing something cute or running away, going to, Outback Steakhouse or something like that. Not this week. This week, our Weird News of the Week is going to be about me, and actually about a lot of people, it turns out. So remember, I think this was last year, there was a big story about Equifax. It's, if you don't know what Equifax is, it's a credit reporting website. It's fairly popular, and it offers you to get your free credit report on their website. Has 14,000 employees apparently, headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. Their stock price is $222 a share somehow, which really makes this news I'm about to tell you really suck. And so somebody hacked into their system, and there was a big security breach last year, and a lot of people had their information compromised. And I don't know if I was one of them. I don't think I was. I looked through my own credit report. I mean, it's possible that they tried to hack me, and I don't really have that really great of a thing to really be trying to steal there, but whatever. And so, it was changed my password, moved on with my life. And so we move on, and you know, a little bit later on, like we're here now, actually today, I got a check in the mail from a settlement for a lawsuit. I guess, for all of us who had our information exposed, to people who hacked this credit bureau. I received a check for $14.91. My identity may have been stolen, and my identity was worth $14.91. Not even $15. $14.91. Yeah. So that's really great. And so I was sitting here like, wow, my life is worth less than $15. My identity is worth less than $15. And I made a comment about it on the Twitter. And I've since heard from multiple people who received checks for considerably less than $15. I had one person tell me he had a check for less than $5, another for just over $5. It's like, man, your stolen identity is only worth $5. What a kick in the pants. And so anyway, I guess I'll tell people, just keep an eye out on your credit score. Make sure people aren't stealing your identity and all that fun, happy stuff. And if next week something else with Aria, not KJ, is hosted by somebody who says they're Aria but isn't me, I think it's important that you report them to a higher power. Report to whomever you need to there. That'll do it for this week. By the way, since I didn't plug it earlier, if you don't enjoy listening to us on whatever platform you listen to us on, you can listen to us on other platforms. We're available, of course, at tinyurl.com/something-else-pod. Also available on angrymarks.com, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Castbox, Overcast, Pod Paradise, Castro, Podbay.fm, and Radio Public. And as we always say, yes, ladies and germs, these are all real places. And believe it or not, we are working on some guests coming up, some more guests, so you don't have to listen to my dulcet tones much only in the future here. Try to get some more voices on the show. I have some decent friends in the wrestling business, and I'm sure somebody out there's laughing at this, but hey, I do. And I'm going to get a couple of them on this show at some point. What do you think about that? Yeah. Alrighty. So I want to thank everyone for listening. Please, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe. Hit the little subscribe button. Click the review button. Give us 5 stars. Talk us up. Share, the link on Twitter. Share the link on Facebook, on TikTok, on Instagram, on whatever the other social media sites that the kids are using these days. I'm not hip. I'm not cool, but, we definitely have a podcast here. So I want to thank everybody for listening again. Take care. Have a great rest of your week. And I'll talk to you again in 7 days. Bye. And welcome to episode number 026 of Something Else with Aria and not KJ. My name is Aria, joined as always today by my good friend and colleague, not KJ. And today we're here discussing Mid-South Wrestling from March 4th, 1982. And then I will be talking about the greatest Ring of Honor world title match in the history of wrestling on an edition of This Match Really Happened. A match that Dave Meltzer undoubtedly gave at least 8.5 stars. Unprecedented. Not even Kenny Omega versus Kazuchika Okada could approach such a star rating. But we will talk about that match later tonight, along with, our usual weird news of the week presented by Nobody. That's coming up later. But first, we are going to jump in here with our Mid-South Wrestling television report. It is Mid-South Wrestling, March 4th, 1982, from the Irish McNeil Boys Club in Shreveport, Louisiana. I'm just going to mention something here first that isn't noticeable unless you're watching along with us here. They actually changed the background. Prior to this, they had a blue background with the outline of Louisiana and Mississippi there. However, and this more has to do with them expanding into Oklahoma and other places, they've taken away the states. It's just the blue background with the words Mid-South Wrestling in big, stupid red letters on it. Now, this is going to be a wacky little episode because the first half of it is basically just recaps. And we're going to listen to a lot of it. I'm not going to actually, when they pitch it to the actual wrestling matches, I'm not going to play that. But we're going to be listening to Boyd Pierce and Bill Watts, a lot of Bill Watts. And let's kick things off with the intro with Boyd and Bill.
This week's edition of Mid-South Wrestling Television Network. I'm your host, Boyd Pierce, and matchmaker Grizzly Smith assigned another outstanding card. Our guest commentator, the always welcome cowboy, Bill Watts. Bill, before we get into the card this week, you know me and I know you, but one of the saddest things that's ever happened to me in many, many years was last week. Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream, was my guest commentator. Not only that I asked him, but also a lot of the fans that asked me sometimes when he was available to be my guest commentator. But the interview as Bob Roop came over and interviewed, and he had something to say to me, and then he had something as he baited and challenged Dusty Rhodes. I tried to get Dusty not to go. You know the rules. You've been guest commentator a long time, and you know everybody saw what happened. I tried to keep him away, but Dusty, the competitor burning inside of him, wouldn't listen, and of course he has to suffer the consequences, and you know what that is.
Well, that's true, Boyd, and I did witness it, and I witnessed the replay of the film as we will show everybody here. Dusty Rhodes was fined $2,500 by Mid-South because of his leaving as a guest commentator and entering the action out there. And, of course, it almost seems like an unjust penalty at the time because Dusty was baited by Bob Roop. But also Dusty knows the rules and regulations, and he didn't have to leave this desk. Bob Roop didn't physically take him and throw him out there, or else Bob Roop would have been fined. And with everything that's going on, and it's a tough sport, it's a contact sport, there has to be lines drawn and rules and regulations laid down and enforced. And Dusty is just a victim of it. But also, if a superstar, an international superstar like Dusty Rhodes, can be forced to pay a $2,500 fine, which Dusty has already paid, then it means that everybody can be under this same system of justice and the same system of rules and regulations. And let's relive right now. Let's watch what happened last week, Boyd, and we will all see that you did try to stop Dusty from entering that fracas.
And so from here, they pitch us to last week with what actually happened, where Bob Roop approached the announce table where Dusty was and goaded him into the ring and into the angle that happened with him in Orndorff. Now, the one thing I did like, and I liked a lot of this here, but they finally explained to you what happens if the guest commentator gets up and leaves in the middle of the show. They are facing a suspension. They get a $2,500 fine, which is what Dusty got. They also mentioned what happened if Bob Roop would have dragged Dusty Rhodes away. Bob Roop would have gotten that $2,500 fine. So they tie up the loose ends you just don't see in wrestling nowadays. Even, with the best of circumstances, it's way too easy to poke holes, into some of the stuff when you watch it on Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays and Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays and Mondays again. And there's a lot of wrestling on TV. Now you see why I watched shows from 40 years ago. But yeah, they tied up these loose ends because, I mean, if you've ever watched these shows, or even if you don't watch these shows and just watch Raw, and you're thinking, what is stopping so and so from leaving the announce desk and going and attacking people? Well, of course, nowadays there's no real penalty for doing that. It's just a fun, exciting part of the show. However, if we were to look at this as a real sport, what would happen in a real sport if, say, John Madden got really angry at Tom Brady in the middle of the game and he left the broadcast booth and threw a football at Tom Brady's head? John Madden would face penalties for this. There would be some sort of fine. He'd probably get fired, but it wouldn't just be, taken as business as usual. This answers these questions. What happens if the guest commentator gets involved? What happens if one of the wrestlers attacks one of the guest commentators? They're not just going to mess around with you here and make you make assumptions. They're telling you flat out, this is what happens. And that's good. So we now go back to the desk after they showed us everything that happened. And Bill's going to recap what we just saw and take us from here.
So as you saw again, Dusty Rhodes not only was injured pride-wise and physically, but he has also had to pay a $2,500 fine for breaking the rules and regulations. But one thing I've known about Dusty Rhodes a long time, Boyd, and you have too, is any superstar or anybody in wrestling, sometimes they need something that motivates them, something they can focus in on. And I'll guarantee you, when you're $2,500 lighter and you watch back on the film because Dusty wanted to see exactly what happened and see why, and he was shown this film clip, it gives you a lot of motivation. And I just say, Bob Roop and Paul Orndorff, don't turn your back on Dusty Rhodes. He'll be coming around the corner.
Dusty is paid and somebody else will pay, and we'll be back right after this word from Mid-South Wrestling Television.
So, Dusty's now motivated. He's going to be back, and, obviously he's going to take $2,500 out of Bob Roop and Paul Orndorff's hide here, and we'll see coming up what happens. So they go to a commercial and they come back, and Bill Watts is going to talk about something that happened on February 23rd, and then he'll introduce a match, and then I'll come back and tell you what happened.
Well, Boyd, many times title matches are booked far in advance. And, of course, if one member or the other doesn't show up, somebody has to substitute. The matchmaker, Grizzly Smith, and the promoter in the town generally get together and try to keep the title situation and the match going on. Or oftentimes a champion has been defeated and the title has changed hands. But no matter what, when the fans pay their money to come see Mid-South Wrestling, they get their money's worth because there's a match there, a championship caliber match. Well, this happened February the 23rd in Baton Rouge Centerplex due to an illness in the Junkyard Dog's family where his young daughter was in the hospital with pneumonia. He flew to North Carolina to be with the family. That crisis, anybody that knows the dog, he can understand because he has lost one child due to a serious illness in the past. Even if he hadn't, he would be with his family. But Grizzly Smith and Jimmy Kilshaw at the Centerplex in Baton Rouge asked Dusty Rhodes to take the Junkyard Dog's place, and Dusty joined with his old teammate Dick Murdoch in a no disqualification match for the Mid-South Tag Team titles against Afa and Sika. And let's join the final moments of that no disqualification match in progress in the Baton Rouge Centerplex.
All right, so as you heard, Junkyard Dog's daughter, was ill. JYD flew home to Charlotte to take care of her, and I tried finding, whether or not this was legitimate, because Bill Watts does not like, no showing someone that he's advertised. Even in WCW when he was at, the worst of Bill Watts, he tried to make people who were injured, they still had to go to the house shows so at least people could see, people who spent their money to see these people wrestle, they could see that, hey, look, these people really are hurt, but they're here, making an appearance to make you feel like you weren't false advertised, you weren't duped into paying your money. So by the way, this is the same daughter, Latoya, who, when Junkyard Dog was coming back from her high school graduation in 1998, got into a car accident and passed away. And by the way, while doing research, I did find out that this daughter, Junkyard Dog's daughter, actually passed away in 2011. So, rest in peace to her, and, best of wishes to her family. I know it's been 12 years, but, we just discovered this today here on the show. So we went to the last few minutes of the tag team title match. Dick Murdoch and Dusty Rhodes challenging the Samoans for the tag titles. And this is one of the first times, other than that Christmas show that we never reviewed, this is one of the first times that we saw house show footage. And, if you've ever seen the ECW fan cam type stuff, that's what this place is going to look like, just a little bit nicer than that. They didn't have any tracking lines or whatever on it. But, this was what you got. It was a one camera shoot. And even though it was a no disqualification match, it was basically a standard tag match where everyone stood on the apron and made tags. Bill Watts did do running commentary over the match footage. Eventually, the match breaks down into a four-way. Paul Orndorff runs in to attack Dusty. And while everyone is distracted, one-man gang ran in and hit a top rope splash to Murdoch, which allowed one of the Samoans to pin him. They do make a point to say that Akbar's quote-unquote one-man gang doesn't have a name yet, and he may have injured Murdoch's ribs with this giant splash. So let's return to the desk to good old Bill Watts.
My father always used to say that even if you corner a rat, if it's cornered and has no way to go, he's dangerous. And without a doubt, General Skandar Akbar is a dangerous man, a scheming man. As we just saw again, and fate probably saved the Junkyard Dog, and Dusty taking his place. Dick Murdoch became the focal point, and Dick Murdoch is now out of wrestling. That makes three men to their credit. Ladd by the one-man gang, Mike George by Alpha and Sika, and now Dick Murdoch, the king of the rednecks. So it's getting tough, Boyd, and Skandar Akbar is trying to completely control everything in Mid-South. There's only three titles he's lacking: the North American, the Mississippi, and the Louisiana. And I'm sure with that one-man gang, he has plans for the people in those title positions.
And we'll return right after this word from Mid-South Wrestling.
And so, Bill recaps what we see. He recaps, all the injuries that have happened thanks to Akbar's men. He talks about Mike George being injured, Ernie Ladd being injured. He talks about now Dick Murdoch being injured. And, he also talks about how Akbar, only has 3 more titles to go, which for those who haven't been paying attention, there's only 4 titles in Mid-South. So Akbar's already got 25% of them, and he's going for all 4, it looks like. And will that happen? ... All right, so go to commercial. We'll come back. And do you think we're going to go to the ring for a match? No. Why on earth would we do that? Instead, we have something a little bit more exciting. We have a promo by, speaking of which, Ernie Ladd. And we're going to cut to the audio here with Bill and Boyd talking, and they're going to pitch it to Reeser Bowden talking to Ernie Ladd. And this is his first appearance after the Samoans injured him, after Akbar got the Samoans to turn on him. And, it's a shame this is the end of Ernie's career, or close to the end. I don't think he lasts much longer as an in-ring participant. Because I'll be honest, I can listen to him cut promos. If Mid-South Wrestling was just 60 minutes of Ernie Ladd promos, I think that'd be a pretty dang good show right there. But hey, before we get to 60 minutes of Ernie Ladd, let's get 2.5 minutes of Ernie. Let's go to that interview right now.
How about Bill Watts was telling you earlier about the injuries that's been suffered right here on television and in the arenas. And Ernie, the Big Cat Ladd, on February the 3rd, right here on television, was injured by a one-man gang. He underwent surgery in Columbus, Georgia, and Reeser Bowden talked to him about what happened. This is the first time since then, so let's listen to Ernie Ladd's interview right now.
Well, Ernie, I was here when a very brutal attack took place, and I know that all of the fans were just as appalled as I was.
Reeser, let me say one thing. What has happened has happened. But I can assure you one thing. A Feist, the smallest dog that I know, will fight in his own backyard. This is my backyard. You know, I've been hurt in pro football. Yes, I've been operated on. I've been hurt as a professional wrestler. But nobody puts Ernie Ladd out, down, and out. You know, they say every dog has his own day. Akbar's had his day. The Samoans, I took them when they was hungry. I fed them. And look what happened to Ernie. Let me show you something, Rich, and then I'm going to talk about this thing. Just step back for a second. This is a cast, and I just wish that I could take it off and let them show you the incisions that they've made on my leg. I went to the same doctor that Paul Ellery went to in Columbus, Georgia. They took films of it and showed me in the operating room and whatever. And if Mid-South will permit me, one day I'll show my operation right on national TV. And I'm really fed up right to here. And don't, by no faith of the imagination, don't you think this is the end of Ernie Ladd? Don't you think that I will tuck my tail and I run like a coward? Coward, I'm not. I might have been a backstabber here and a backstabber there, but coward I am not. And don't you ever forget that, Risa. You and nobody else can ever accuse me of being a coward. But I'm just going to get the record straight right now. I'm going to do a little research. I'm going to go back in. How do you predict the future but other than by the past? So, but I'm going back into the past and dig out and find a few people that I know that's qualified to join alliances with Ernie Ladd. And go, when you want a job done, a job well done, you go there and do it yourself. I don't care who I fight and how many I fight, but I just want the right weapons when I fight.
Ernie Ladd is on a hunting trip. Watch for him.
Well, Boyd Pierce, Ernie Ladd is definitely a force to be reckoned with at 6'9", 320. But as big as he is, he's only as good as his legs are. That's the old saying in pro sports, you're only as good as your wheels are. So time will have to see if they heal properly after the surgery. But we can see, again, that Skandar Akbar, with his influence of terror, is trying to really take it to the junkyard dog. He's trying to isolate the dog right now and put him in jeopardy as we watch the dog and Brian Blair against Afonseca in a match that was here a couple of weeks ago.
All right, so he pitches to the match from last week. Before we get into that, so you heard Ernie's promo. They were standing outside the ring next to the ring apron, and Ernie put his leg up on the apron, pulled up his pant leg, so you saw the cast, which is from about his thigh down to his shin. And also, I should note before I forget, I believe this is the first time they actually made mention on TV about Paul Ellering's injury. As you recall, he was shooting with the Iron Sheik, and they at least covered what happened to the Sheik, or at least, they made up a story about what happened to the Sheik. But they never mentioned, what happened to Paul Ellering. Paul Ellering got a severe knee injury, and he's out, I think, till July at this point. So that's about 3 or 4 months away. But, Ernie, he says it. He's not a coward. He may be a backstabber and a liar and a traitor, but he's not a coward. And he's looking into his past to find people to align with, to go after the Samoans, to go after the one-man gang, to go after Skandar Akbar. And we're going to see what happens in the next few weeks or next few months here. And then, you saw from there, Bill pitched to, he said a few weeks ago, it was taped a few weeks ago, but it aired last week on Mid-South Wrestling Television Network, about the tag team match with Junkyard Dog and Brian Blair versus Samoans. If you didn't listen to us last week, why? But anyway, this is the one where the ref gets bumped. So Mr. Olympia makes a save because Brian Blair is down and out. Olympia makes a save for Dog. The referee wakes up as Olympia was laying out one of the Samoans, and the Samoans thus win by disqualification. And if you recall, that was a standby match, like the third or fourth standby match. And it was like after two regular enhancement talent that I can't remember their names right now wrestled in the prior standby match. So this was less important than that one. All right, so they showed us a video of that, and we're going to come back to what I promise is, well, it's not the last time we hear from Bill Watts, but it's the last time we hear from Bill Watts before we actually get actual matches here. So let's go to that right now.
Junkyard Dog tried to carry on alone, but even as powerful as he is, with his partner Brian Blair out, you could see it was just a matter of time before they injured the dog. So I'm sure even though the match ended in a disqualification, the dog was really glad to see Mr. Olympia, because sometimes it's better to lose the battle and win the war than to get just completely wrecked.
And Bill, we have exciting action coming up. The Junkyard Dog versus the Masked Grappler right after this word from Mid-South Wrestling.
So without commercials, this show is 41 minutes and 16 seconds long. That whole recap, everything that we've just gone over, was the first 21 minutes and 30 seconds of the show. So literally, there are only 18 minutes of new material to talk about. And I mean, yeah, the Ernie Ladd promo was new. And, they showed us that tag team match. That was new. So basically, we've had 6 minutes of new material, 15 minutes of recap. And now, if we're lucky, we're going to get another 18 minutes of new material right now. And we're going straight to the ring here. And it is the Junkyard Dog, the Louisiana heavyweight champion, going one-on-one with the Grappler in a non-title match. I made note here that, yes, we are more than halfway through the show and we're getting our first live match. I'd asked if Russo was booking, but we all know that if he was, that first 21 minutes would have had 23 different angles, and most of those would completely contradict each other along the way. They did announce that Dog's daughter survived the crisis. So, if it was legitimate, they at least told you, hey, she's okay. She's better now. Hooray for that. Dog put on a full Nelson at one point and was on for close to a full minute. And Grappler looked very relaxed. Grappler ended up getting a 1 count after the power slam, but Dog kicked out by pressing about 10 feet into the air. Dog trapped Grappler in the ropes and then did his running shoulders to the Grappler. But then the Grappler loaded his boot, which, for those listening to us in 2023 and are unfamiliar of this, he tapped his foot on the ground. And that is the acknowledged method of loading your boot. And he kicked Junkyard Dog in the stomach, but he was only able to get a 2 count off of that. Then, to prevent the referee from catching this, he bounced his heel off the mat, which is the recognized way to unload your boot. Apparently, that is a recognized thing here. Dog used a side Russian leg sweep and then unlaced the Grappler's boot, and after probably a good 45 seconds, he managed to yank off the Grappler's boot. The Grappler got a cane from outside the ring, but the Dog got it from him. He hit the Grappler with it, and it was not a disqualification. Instead, Dog got the win. So yeah, remember when I said earlier about tying up loose ends and all that, and how, they had fewer loopholes back in the day? Well, fewer doesn't mean zero. But they did try to cover for it, saying that the referee was sick of the Grappler's ways, which would have made more sense if the referee knew that the Grappler had loaded his boot and tried to cheat earlier. But we were supposed to believe that the referee did not know this, and that the Grappler just, happened to get a 2 count of a kick to the stomach. I mean, it's a heck of a kick. Up next, we had the return to Mid-South of Killer Carl Cox. He's a babyface, and he makes a point to go around the ring and shake the hands of everybody in the front row. And he's walking around carrying a trenching shovel with him. And the story is that when they were in the Marines, he was in the Marines with Dick Murdoch, and he trained Dickie Murdoch to be a professional wrestler. And the guy, I'll tell you what, it's the first time we've seen him here, and we've seen a lot of baby faces get a meh reaction. Sometimes I felt like Junkyard Dog was the only baby face to really get the crowd to go crazy. But the crowd was really into Killer Carl Cox here. And I do have to mention his boots. He's got 2 miscolored boots, one black, one white. But the white boot is so, I don't want to say dirty, but it's like so off-colored that a couple times I had to look at it to make sure he was actually wearing a boot and that wasn't just his foot, because it was that, shade of white. If you go back and watch, it's 29 minutes and 45 seconds into the show. And when Reeser Bowden introduced him, Killer Carl had a promo, and he wanted to say something to the fine people here in Shreveport, Louisiana.
I understand that there's been a lot of things going on around here. It's time for a little justice. There's guys getting hurt bad. I'm talking about the likes of Dick Murdoch, Mike George, and some guys that I don't like. Any clues or any lads? There's time for some justice now. I'm here and I'm going to make sure we get some justice.
There we have it. Bob Orton Jr., you saw the return of Killer Carl Cox, Bill.
You better watch him. He's got a Marine Corps entrenching tool. He's got his fatigues on.
An entrenching tool, also known as a shovel, in case you're curious. So yeah, Orton interrupted him, but Cox sent him flying. The fans were into Killer Carl as Orton goes flying out of the ring and into the first row with an uppercut. And then Cox pins him in less than 2 minutes with a delayed brainbuster. So we'll see here what we have to look forward to with Killer Carl Cox here in the future. Then up next, this is going to be an interesting one here. Up next, it is the debut for us of Iron Mike Sharp versus Don Serrano. Now, a lot of you longtime fans are listening to this right now going, all right, Battle of the Jobbers, Iron Mike Sharp and Don Serrano. Nope. This is Iron Mike Sharp. I think this is before he actually became a WWF enhancement talent in the 80s. And this is him actually getting a little bit of a push here in Mid-South. And if all you've ever seen of him was the Iron Mike Sharp gimmick, where he has his forearm brace and he announces that he's Canada's greatest athlete before he does a job in 2 minutes, you really should check out Mike Sharp in Mid-South because, he's pretty decent. He's not remembered as, an all-time great wrestler or anything, and he's not. But, he is pretty good in the ring. He knows what he's doing. And, he did a pretty good job here wrestling Don Serrano. And Sharp won with an over-the-shoulder backbreaker. The only thing promoted for next week, and I'm actually going to play some audio. Normally I wouldn't bother, especially on a show that we've had so much audio. Except, hint, hint, this is going to be a pretty big little deal in the next couple of weeks. Bill Watts and Boyd Pierce are going to discuss Ted DiBiase's upcoming North American title match in 2 weeks, right here on Mid-South Wrestling.
Yeah, Ted DiBiase would be a great guest commentator. In 2 weeks, Grizzly Smith said he's going to have a North American title match here on Mid-South Wrestling. And he hasn't decided yet whether it'll be Ted DiBiase against Paul Orndorff or against Bob Roop. Of course, once and for all, the issue between DiBiase and Paul Orndorff needs to be settled, and Grizzly Smith has been talking about settling it in a steel cage match. I would just say that any town that was lucky enough to get that bout would really be fortunate, because that way you would have it down man to man, because so far DiBiase has been troubled with the fact that wherever Paul Orndorff, there was Bob Roop, or vice versa. So I can understand the dilemma of matchmaker Grizzly Smith, and also the dilemma of the North American champion, is getting it down to one man that he has to face.
All right. So what you may have picked up at the beginning of that, and I forgot to mention, is that the only thing that's promoted for next week is that we will have the popular Ted DiBiase doing guest commentary. And Bill mentions that in 2 weeks, Ted DiBiase is going to defend the North American title, but Grizzly Smith doesn't know yet whether he's going to be defending against Paul Orndorff or Bob Roop. So let's see what happens next week. Because next week, they pretty much have to tell us who it's going to be. And then in 2 weeks, we'll have the match. As I mentioned, Sharp wins with an over-the-shoulder backbreaker. And for those of you tired of listening to Bill Watts, we're done for the week with audio clips from that. We then go to our expiration of time match, where Jesse Barr takes on Jesse Tanner. Whoa! No, not that Jesse. But anyway, Bill makes a point to say he does not know who Jesse Tanner is, but he does wish well to the timekeeper of the boxing matches in New Orleans, who is currently in the hospital. I'd say best wishes to him, but this is 39 years ago. Actually, it's what, 82, right? Yeah, it's 82. So it's 40 years, 11 months, and 1 week ago. Um, if I was a betting person, the timekeeper at the New Orleans boxing matches in 1982 is no longer with us. And bless his family, wish them well, but something tells me they're probably over it by now. But anyway, Bill is so into this match that he calls Jesse Tanner Jesse Ventura and doesn't even catch himself. And this was every expiration of time match you'll see in Mid-South until the finish. Barr actually wins with a really nice looking delayed German suplex with the bridge. I don't know what made me think about this, but it was a lot nicer than Medusa's German suplex with the bridge. And I'm not saying that's a low bar to cross, because it was Medusa did a nice German suplex, but this one was undoubtedly better. So that was Mid-South Wrestling for March 4th, 1982 in Shreveport, Louisiana. And of course, next week we'll be back with Mid-South from March 11th, 1982. But now, oh man. In fact, like this is a match that's so great that I considered switching my usual order and going to Weird News of the Week next before finishing up what this match really happened. But I figure, for the sake of tradition, we need to keep things as it is. So we're going with This Match Really Happened, a Ring of Honor world title match. And when you think about Ring of Honor and the World Championship and some of the great wrestlers who challenged for that belt before, and this is September of 2006. So it's during Bryan Danielson's, long run as champion. He's just past a year as champion. And he wrestled he had so many great matches that are up on Honor Club right now. I remember he had a match with Roderick Strong over WrestleMania weekend that went nearly an hour. He wrestled Lance Storm and Lance Storm's first non-WWE match. That went about 30 minutes. He wrestled pretty much everybody in Ring of Honor. Everyone that you could think of at some point went down in defeat to the American Dragon, Bryan Danielson. And so now, to find Bryan a top-tier challenger, because this isn't a Ring of Honor show, it's for Liberty States Wrestling, September 30th, 2006 in Bridgeport, Connecticut. They had to go out, and they had to find just a star among stars, a wrestler among wrestlers, one of the great in-ring technicians of our time, someone that everyone sitting at home is going to be like, oh my God, Bryan Danielson, the technical wizard, has met his match. Because that's right. Bryan Danielson went one-on-one in a match that really happened against the Ugandan giant Kamala with Kim Chi in his corner. I am not making this up. And there's probably a lot of you listening to this going, well, yeah, we knew that happened. But still, just the preposterosity of this. Bryan Danielson, and this is years before he went to WWE, and people saw him doing comedic skits with, Kane and all that stuff. It's like, this is Bryan freaking Danielson, the super serious Ring of Honor world champion, the best technical wrestler in the world, defending his title against 1980s and early 90s WWF cartoon character Kamala with Kim Chi. And if you recall last week, and here's where it gets funny. Last week when we did This Match Really Happened, it was Kamala versus Umaga from June of 2006, where Kamala basically laid on the mat the entire match and really couldn't get up or do anything. And the match went like 2 minutes. And it was everything it needed to be. And when I pulled this up on YouTube, the video goes 20 minutes. So it's like, this could be one for the memory banks here. But let's press play on that 20 minutes and see what happened. So first, Prince Nana comes out and tells the standing room only crowd of about 25 people that they are all fat and need to get down on their hands and knees, and informs us that he is in fact the referee tonight and he hopes that the world champion Bryan Danielson is ready to get his butt kicked. What an unbiased official. They did the ring intros, and actually, once both guys were in the ring, they did the intros again. And it was David Marquez, well, I don't know if he still does it, but the NWA Hollywood announcer that did the ring announcing here. There was one guy in the crowd that had streamers and tried to do the mid 2000s indie wrestling streamer throw thing. I mean, that is 4% of the crowd right there, but he was the only person. Danielson did try to adhere to the code of honor, but Kamala threatened to chop him. They didn't even touch until about 2 minutes in, when they locked up and Kamala shoved him down. Danielson ducked and dodged and weaved his way around, trying to find an opening, which led to another lockup and another shove by Kamala. We eventually got a Greco-Roman knuckle lock by Kamala, and the fans chanted for Danielson to tap, but instead Bryan stomped on Kamala's feet and then threatened to chop the Ugandan giant himself. What shenanigans are happening here in this Ring of Honor title match? Kamala got some offense here, but actually took his first bump after a missile drop kick, which made him roll outside the ring, so he didn't have to actually suffer the indignity of trying to stand up. They fought outside the ring, and Danielson bumped all over the place for Kamala. And this was, a hardwood gym floor that he's bouncing all over. He goes headfirst into the ring post. I mean, Kamala at this point, you can tell Kamala's pretty gassed. And not that he'd ever had, the longest matches in his career ever when he was in his prime, but this is long after said prime. Danielson got him back down and hit the flying headbutt, but Nana refused to count. When he eventually did count, we got the longest 2 count ever before Kamala kicked out. Back outside the ring, Danielson tried a headbutt, and of course it didn't work, because when has headbutting savage wrestlers ever worked? They continued to fight around the gym, and Danielson just took one bump after another, and they went through the curtains that were set up. That wasn't even it. They did fight back through the curtains and actually ripped them down. Danielson choked Kamala with them, and Kim Chi tried to get involved, but he got ran into a wall. Prince Nana tried to get involved, but he got thrown into a wall. Danielson ran after Kamala with a chair, but it got blocked. Kamala got the chair and hit Danielson around the time Nana stood up and called for the bell. I was pretty sure we were going to have a no contest here. Danielson continued to beat on Kamala back through the doors, and the doors that the curtain used to be in front of, by the way. And finally, some guy came out and announced that they were having a pull apart backstage, and it was announced that Kamala won by disqualification. Danielson came back out and grabbed the mic. He said that this was not how an ROH title match goes down, and he challenged Kamala to come back out. When Kamala didn't, he challenged him to a tag team match on the next show. Prince Nana came back out and teased getting in the ring, but said Danielson doesn't want to face him. He did agree to the tag team match to the next show before walking off. Danielson then chased Nana to the back, and that was it for a really weird little "this match really happened." Bryan Danielson successfully defends the Ring of Honor World title against the Ugandan giant Kamala. I mean, I don't know about the rest of y'all, but that seems like, a hell of a show that you just can't, or a hell of a match you can't miss. And it is available on YouTube. And I mean, I guess I'll have to find the next Kamala match to talk about next week, huh? We've got 2 in a row with him. But now to wrap things up, we're going to turn our attention to honestly, this is legit one of my favorite segments I do. It's Weird News of the Week. And it's Weird News of the Week presented by Nobody. Nobody, the company that sponsors nothing. And we go back to our old friend Ben Hooper at UPI.com with our weird news. Spooked parrot flies 155 miles from home in New Zealand. This is from February 8th, so today as I'm recording this. A 3-year-old macaw parrot who became spooked and flew away from the New Zealand home was spotted 9 days later 155 miles away. Hamish and Lulu Peterson said that they have raised the parrot named Pablo since he was 4 months old, and they trained him as a free-flying bird, allowing him to wander around the community of Russell in the Bay of Islands and respond to whistles from his owners. The couple said Pablo fled the area 9 days ago when he was spooked by a neighbor. The Petersons and their son Caleb have now traveled 155 miles to East Auckland after numerous reported Pablo sightings in the area. There are not that many free-flighted macaws around, so we just looked at each other and said, "We've got to go," Peterson told One News. The couple said Pablo's movements the past couple days appear to be centered around Pigeon Mountain in the Auckland suburb of Half Moon Bay. We've had so many close calls, especially yesterday and the day before. He was just at the bottom of the hill here, and he was just so close, and then a car goes by, Lulu Peterson said. So, it's good to hear that they were able to find their parrot, hooray for that. So that is going to do it for this week. By the way, if you are listening to us right now on whatever device you're listening to us and don't like it, well, there's 100 other ways. You can go to tinyurl.com/somethingelsepod, but we are also ultimately available on all your favorite podcasting sites. Every site that you go to steal your favorite podcast from, we're probably on it. And that includes Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. I run down the list, but let's be honest, who actually, uses Castro or Podbay.fm, especially to listen to the dulcet tones of my voice? But I want to thank everyone for listening. We will be back here next week. We talk about more Mid-South, and who knows what will be next for Weird News of the Week. Until then, take care and have a great rest of your week. And welcome to Something Else with Ari and Not KJ, episode number 027. Today, I'm planning on talking about Mid-South Wrestling episode from March 11th, 1982. But to be honest, right now, I want to talk about something that just really sucks right now. When I started this show with KJ, we talked about how we wouldn't just talk about wrestling. We would talk about LGBT issues as they came up. And obviously the show became more about wrestling than it did anything LGBT related. And it wasn't for a desire to avoid talking about it. I think sometimes we didn't want to dampen any of the fun that this show was supposed to be. But to be honest, at this point, shit needs to be said and shit needs to be talked about. And to be honest, when I pieced together this week's show and I watched the episode of Mid-South, I watched it yesterday, took all my notes, made all my notes of audio that I wanted to play. I pulled up some wacky news to talk about. At no point was I going to discuss what I'm going to kick off the show by talking about. And now I'm recording this show, and it doesn't matter when you're actually going to hear this, but I'm recording the show on Tuesday the 14th, Valentine's Day. And as a lot of you may be aware, there was a 16-year-old transgender teenage girl in the UK that got murdered over the weekend named Brianna Gay. And let's face facts. She was allegedly murdered by two 15-year-olds. And this part isn't alleged because of who she was and who she became. And this is yet another just disgusting, needless tragedy. One more transgender person has been murdered, and it's not going to stop. And the ridiculous thing about this is the BBC was reporting uh, this morning that the police were investigating over whether or not it was a hate crime. You know, this girl was targeted because she was trans. She wasn't targeted just because these two alleged murderers were just really fucking bored that day and decided that the next person to walk by them was going to get killed. That's not what the fuck happened. And the fact is, sorry, fact is, stuff like this happens all the time. And it's going to be a big deal for about a week, if that. Like, it's a big deal right now to the transgender community. No one else seems to even know about it, which is just, the worst freaking part. And even then, in a couple days, this is all going to be forgotten. We'll all move on, much like, all those school shootings we kept having. And it's not like that's ever stopped. But what happens? It's the same fucking pattern. People get murdered. We talk about it for a week, if that. Then we all move on with our lives until the next one. And here's a fact. You know, I am 38 years old. I knew when I was 11 years old that I was who I am. I didn't know how to label it. I didn't know what to do about it, but I knew that I am who I am. I knew that I was Arya, for better or worse. This is me. And it took me until I was 31 years old, 20 years later, to get the courage to come out and be myself. And despite having a ton of support from everybody in my life, the fact is that every day when I leave my apartment, whether I'm going to work, whether I'm going to the grocery store, whether I'm going to the gym, no matter what I'm doing, I am keenly aware of everybody and everything around me. I'm very aware of every man, woman, child on my block that I walk by in the store, that I see at the mall. And I'm just on a high alert that at some point, some nut job who hates me for deciding to be happy, deciding to live my life the way that I should have been all along, some nut job's going to decide that that's not good enough. That because I'm not living up to the standards that they believe that I should have, I need to be killed. I need to be assaulted. I need to be attacked. And God knows what else. And there are, you know, and, who knows if anyone's going to listen to this at this point. Not that it really fucking matters, but there are assholes out there who are using this shit as further proof. There are actually assholes out there saying that if Brianna, this 16-year-old girl, if she wouldn't have transitioned, then she wouldn't have been murdered. And this is another reason why we shouldn't let children transition. What the fuck is wrong with some of you people? You know what would have happened if she didn't transition? She'd have been fucking depressed as a teen. She would have sat and spent years and years wondering what's wrong with her. Why can't she be like everybody fucking else? And you know how I know that's what she would think? Because it's what I fucking thought for years. And it's what I bet a whole lot of trans people before they came out had the same fucking thought. And you would much rather, let's be honest, you fucking assholes out there would much rather us be dead than be alive and happy. Because, how dare anybody be happy? And while I'm at it, and I'm going to fucking call out the rest of the LGBTQ plus community. And this always surprises, my straight friends when I point this out. There is no community that's more divisive, that is at each other's throats more than the LGBT community. And right now, and it's not everybody, obviously, and I don't want to get into this. It's not fucking everybody. But do you know how many fucking people in the LGBT community are against trans people? And the fucking fact is, every letter of the LGBT community, they all have enough people within them that have hatred towards the other letters. I have friends who are shocked to know that there are lesbian women out there who specifically hate trans people. And there are gays who hate lesbians, and they all hate bisexuals, and now they all hate transgender people. And I bet asexuals are in there somewhere. And every fucking person, because instead of us uniting as fucking one and standing up together against all this fucking bullshit that we're up against, they decided, let's also, turn our back on trans people. But guess what? LGBT people, you know who they're going to turn after us? They're going to go after the gays. They're going to go after the lesbians. They're going to go after the bisexuals. Because, they're like, oh, we can't have drag queens around children. It's overly sexual. Well, next will be we can't have gay people around children because, all LGBT people are pedophiles and they're going to go after children. And that shit's going to be next. And if you're sitting out there and you think that, you're somehow special and it's not going to happen to you next, guess what? It fucking is. So it's about fucking time that you all get off your asses. You put aside the bullshit little bickering they all have for each other, and we stand united as one. Because honestly, I am tired of being afraid to die for just being me. I live in the most liberal state in the country, perhaps the most transgender friendly state in the country. And if you think for 1 second that I don't think I'm going to get murdered at some point because I'm trans, you have another fucking thing coming. And this whole thing is just ridiculous. Let us live. What exactly is any of y'all's fucking problem with trans people? Why? Because why? Because the pretend man in the sky, created a fake book that said that it was wrong. I'm sorry. I went to catechism classes. I went to church when I was a kid. I've read more of the Bible than most of y'all. And, and the fact is, there's no fucking point in that Bible that is against trans people. And if you want to point out, oh, well, they're against gay people because of Leviticus, go through that fucking book and write down everything that they admonished. And at the end of the day, no matter if you want to believe in God, that's your right. But at the end of the day, you know what it said in the fucking Bible? God said to love everybody. At no point in the Bible does it say God said to love the straight cisgender people. It said to love everybody. So don't pick and choose what parts of your Bible you want to fucking listen to and adhere to. All right, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to take a few breaths, and I'll be back to continue the show. Okay. All right, so we're going to go forward with the show here. I hope anybody who listened to the first, whatever it was, 10, 15 minutes, I hope you got something out of it. But, let's move forward here. Let's take a few deep breaths and move on with our show. As I mentioned, this is Something Else with Aria and Not KJ, episode number 027. I'm Aria, and today we're talking about Mid-South from March 11, 1982, from the Irish and Beale Boys Club in Shreveport, Louisiana. If you enjoy listening to this show, please subscribe to us. We're available on all your favorite platforms that you steal podcasts from, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podbean, Castbox, Overcast, Pod Paradise, Castro, Podbay.fm, and Radio Public. And as always, as I point out, yes, these are all real places. As a matter of fact, over the last week, I discovered that we have a lot of people who listen through Overcast. And I guess, hey, whatever works. If you're out there listening to this and you're on Overcast, hey, thanks for listening. And of course, we're also available on tinyurl.com/something-else-pod. I do, so I don't forget this, I am working on a new project that will be joining the Something Else podcasting network the next few weeks. If you subscribe to Something Else, you will get that new project once it becomes available. So subscribe, keep an eye out, please listen, give a 5-star review, and, give us some feedback. I love to hear what you'd have to say. I'd love to hear what your thoughts were on the beginning of the show today. Send me some love. We're out there on the Twitterverse. I'm at the real AW1984. You can also send me an email, as long as you can spell my name, ariawhitner@yahoo.com. Send some feedback. Let me know you're out there and listening and what your thoughts are on everything. But let's dive in here with some Mid-South Wrestling from March 11, 1982. And we're going to start with the opening intro with Boyd Pierce and this week's guest commentator, Ted DiBiase. I think I didn't choose to share audio. Well, that's going to make things more interesting, isn't it? Nope, I didn't. So, wow, we're on a... Oh boy, this is a heck of a show right now, isn't it? So let's share computer audio and start over again. Here is Boyd Pierce and Ted DiBiase.
Host Boyd Pearson, we have lots of exciting action. You're going to see a match Dusty Rhodes as he takes on the Polish Prince, Ed Wiskowski. The masked grappler, former North American heavyweight title holder, will be on the card. And the brain-busting ex-Marine with the unorthodox style, Killer Carl Cox, is here, and he's just itching for action. Iron Mike Sharp, the muscular star, takes on Big Bob Orton Jr. And talk about titles, listen, the Mississippi heavyweight title holder, Mr. Olympia, takes on the former Louisiana heavyweight champion, Bob Roop. It all adds up to great action, and talked about great action, one of the best in the ring. You're going to find out he's one of the best out of the ring. The North American heavyweight title holder, Ted DiBiase, will be my guest commentator. Ted, I know you'll give us the expert knowledge that you possess.
Boy, thank you very much, and as always, it's a pleasure to be here with you on Mid-South Wrestling. You know, there's a lot going on in the Mid-South. There's been a lot of people injured recently at the hands of Skandar Akbar and his one-man wrecking crew, as he calls him. And just a little bit of a progress report on those men. My good friend Dick Murdoch, whose ribs were seriously injured, is still injured but recovering. Mike George, who hurt his lower back very severely, is, from what I understand, recovering and under his own home personal physician's care. And then last week, everybody got a chance to hear what Ernie Ladd had to say about his injury, and that he's coming back, and that remains to be seen. As myself personally, I have a North American title defense coming up next week. As of yet, my opponent hasn't been picked, but I know that it'll be Paul Orndorff or Bob Roop, and I'm looking forward to either one of those.
And we're looking forward to your expertise here as we go into the opening event. Here's the introduction.
All right, so you heard Boyd with Ted. Ted actually looked really angry while Boyd introduced him for whatever reason. Ted gives us the injury update on his good friend Dick Murdoch along with Mike George. And he puts over, what's his name, Skandar Akbar's crew. Because they've all been taken out in part, at least, due to the one-man gang, or since he doesn't have a name yet, he's still just a one-man wrecking crew. And yeah. And they also talk about how next week it's going to be Ted DiBiase defending his North American title against either Bob Roop or Paul Orndorff. Matchmaker Grizzly Smith has not made up his mind yet over which one's getting the title shot. Maybe we'll find out this week. But either way, Ted DiBiase's got a title match next week here on Mid-South Wrestling. We go to our first match. It's Bill Ash and Uncle Jesse Tanner versus Buddy Landel and Jesse Barr. This is pre-Nature Boy Buddy Landel, so he has black hair instead of bleach blonde. And Boudreaux starts with Ash and throws a pretty nice drop kick. Tanner tags in and doesn't do much better as both Landel and Barr work him over. Ash gets back in and finally gets in some offense on Barr, but it does not last long. You ever notice we do not see very long heat segments in these tag team matches, do we? And maybe that's just, partially due because it's a TV product. They've only got, so many minutes. It is, especially now, it's essentially a squash match. But even in like the Samoans matches, a lot of times, or even not even the Samoans matches, just your standard tag team matches with the stars, you don't see the heels on offense for too long. And, whatever it is, though, it works for this audience. But Landel pins Tanner with a really nice-looking belly-to-belly overhead suplex. Now I'm going to toss it here to Boyd Pierce, who's going to throw us to a pre-tape match with Dusty Rhodes and Ed Wiskowski. And in case that sounds really familiar, it is. And I'll talk to you about it here in just a second.
Now we're going to show you an event between the American Dream, the living stardust, Dusty Rhodes, as he goes against the big star from New York State, the Polish Prince, Ed Wiskowski. The voice you'll hear will be the Oklahoma Stampeder, Cowboy Bill Watts, as he gives the description. Let's watch it right now.
All right, so we all know my opinion on the Polish Prince, Ed Wiskowski. It was bad enough when I had to watch this match 3 weeks ago and review it the first time. I am not in the habit of re-watching Ed Wiskowski matches because, this match actually aired 3 weeks ago here on Mid-South Wrestling. It was the week before they did the angle with Dusty at the commentary booth. And for some reason, they don't even explain why. For some reason, they just re-aired it here. It's possible that they just had a 3-minute hole in the show and needed to put something in there. But that's why he sent somebody out with a microphone to cut a promo. So we're going to go back here to the desk because, unlike last week, remember last week, more than the first half of the show was talking and recaps and a lot of audio to play. This week, there's honestly not a whole lot of audio, so I got to find it where I can. And I'm going to go back here now to Ted DiBiase recapping what we just saw a minute ago.
Again, boy, Dusty Rhodes, the son of a plumber, proves again that he's a man about that ring, and he knows his way around there, and he did it one more time, taking on Big Ed Wiskowski.
He certainly did, and we'll be back with more live action right after this word from Mid-South Wrestling.
All right. So up next, then, we get our next match. It is the Grappler, one-on-one with Frank Monty. Now, the Grappler is a former North American champion. He feuded with Ted DiBiase, and thanks to DiBiase's figure 4, the Grappler has a foot injury that requires a specialized built-up boot. And most people, including Ted DiBiase and the fans, feel that this is unneeded and that it's a loaded boot that he's using to take out opponents. And we're going to play some audio here right now, which includes Boyd Pierce's comeback, because Boyd Pierce, in his attempts to be the, level-headed, fair and impartial announcer that he is, he's got to play the other side of the track sometimes.
Holder, our guest commentator, Ted DiBiase. Ted?
Well, boy, sitting here at the commentary table, I'm supposed to be an unbiased spectator and give my commentary unbiased about what takes place in the ring. But when I talk about the masked grappler, it's very hard for me, as what's taking place between this man and myself, to be anything but biased. The man walks to the ring carrying a cane. He wrestles with a built-up boot due to an injury received at my hands when I applied the figure 4 leg lock to him. It's my opinion that the boot that he wears is a loaded boot. I know from being kicked with it a number of times, but all in all, you can't discredit the man completely. You have to give credit where credit is due. He's a top-flight competitor. He would have never gained the North American title if he were not.
Ted, a lot of wrestlers and fans alike share your views that maybe nothing's wrong with that shoe and foot of the masked grappler, but he does have a certificate from a licensed doctor, and that gives him the authenticity to wrestle with the boot on in the ring. So we can't dispute that. Some doctor somewhere has declared that he needs it, so that's the way it is.
Right.
We really need to look into this and find out who is this doctor that gave the Grappler permission to wear what essentially is a loaded up boot and allows him to take an unfair advantage on his opponents the way it does. Now, Frank Monty did look pretty good here, but Grappler cut him off with a big shoulder breaker and then drove him face first into the mat in what kind of looked like a cross between the Miz's skull-crushing finale and a running bulldog. You'd have to see it, and to be honest, it really didn't look that good. And to be perfectly honest, the shoulder breaker should have just been his finish. Killer Carl Cox, KKK, is out next. He's going one-on-one with Don Serrano. Cox is just as popular as he was last week, and the weirdest thing about this was that there were young girls literally dancing in the crowd to his theme song, Here Comes the Judge. And in case you've never seen Cox, he is not a handsome young man that you'd think young girls would go crazy for. He has the Anderson family hairline and body type. In fact, he could have been the long-lost Anderson brother or cousin or uncle, nephew, whatever. But he isn't. He's Killer Carl Cox. He has his truncheon tool, and the crowd just goes back crazy for this guy. Cox attacked at the bell, like all good baby faces do, and won quickly with a brain buster. Iron Mike Sharp, without the E at the end of his name, versus Bob Orton Jr. In 2 or 3 years, both of these men would be on WWF television with forearm gimmicks. Here, they're just two straight-up wrestlers. Last week, Sharp debuted here And as I mentioned, if the only Mike Sharp you've ever seen was as a WWF jobber, then you really need to watch his run here in Mid-South, which might be, his only push that he's ever really received as a wrestler. And if not his only one, then it's one of his few. Orton, who, if you remember back in December, uh, I was assuming he was on his way out of the territory, especially after he lost a tag team match that he wasn't even a participant in. That's when I thought, okay, this guy's out the door soon, but he's still here. I don't imagine for very long because we're into 82 here, but I guess we'll see. And both men look good here. Sharp won with his over-the-shoulder backbreaker because apparently he's Bruno. And this was one of the better, matches we've seen on this show here so far. Sharp picks up the win, and we'll see what happens with him next. So we're going to go to some audio here where Boyd plugs next week's North American title match, and then we're going to get an interview with the two potential challengers.
Week here on Mid-South Wrestling, the North American Heavyweight Championship will be on the line as Ted DiBiase, our guest commentator this week, will defend his coveted title and belt against the challenge of either Paul Orndorff or Bob Roop. Reeser Bowden talked to him earlier, and this is what they had to say.
There's absolutely no doubt that Paul Orndorff and Bob Roop are the two top contenders for the North American Heavyweight title, but they have a dilemma. And I'm going to let them explain what it is.
Well, the reason why we're up here, Bob and myself, 1 week from today, Bob or myself, we don't know yet, they haven't told us, will be wrestling Ted DiBiase right here on national TV for the North American belt.
That's right. You got the two top contenders, and they won't say which one is the top one. If it's only 1 week away, it takes time to scout for the North American title on TV, and we've only gotten 1 week without knowing who it is. Also, whichever one is selected, the other one's barred. I mean, the millions and millions, the multi-millions of people that watch this program are going to get to see the match. All the people out here in the audience are going to see it, but if he wrestles, I'm barred. That means that's prejudicial. That is unfair. It's biased.
It's as simple as that. You know what they're doing? It's a conspiracy against myself and Bob Roop. Now, Mid-South is protecting people like Ted DiBiase, Dog, and people like that. It's very obvious. And now this right here, it proves that Mid-South is protecting them. It's as simple and plain as that.
The silliest thing I heard Bill Watts out here saying, oh, I think Paul Orndorff and Bob Roop ought to wrestle each other and let the winner wrestle Ted DiBiase. This man's been watching my back for 6 months to keep Ted DiBiase from stabbing me, and I want to wrestle him?
You know something? Watts ought to sit down in that chair and keep his big fat mouth shut, because this ain't got nothing to do with him. This is between myself, Bob, and Ted DiBiase. Plain as simple as that.
Well, of course, time will tell, and you'll find out which one of these men will wrestle Ted DiBiase for the North American Heavyweight title.
I hope it's me.
Well, I hope it's me too, Bob. I'm serious. You're my best friend, and we've watched each other for a long time, but one of us will have that North American belt. I hope it's me.
And we'll see next week.
Ted DiBiase, you heard what Bob Roop and Paul Orndorff had to say about the title match next week. What about it?
Well, Boyd, regardless of whatever stipulation might be laid down, when it comes to Paul Orndorff and Bob Roop, there's always going to have something to complain about. And it seems obvious to me that their biggest complaint is that regardless of which one wrestles me, the other man is going to be barred from the arena. Now, I asked for no stipulation. Matchmaker Grizzly Smith did this on his own. I'm glad that he did, because my only argument is this: I want the opportunity to wrestle and take care of business with each man as an individual, and not have to worry about somebody running in from behind. And up until right now, that's been my constant concern. Where you find one, you find the other. And the way this is laid down, regardless of which one it is next week, there's only going to be one man for me to worry about, and I'm happy about that and looking forward to it, whichever man Grizzly Smith decides to put in the ring with me.
Thank you, Ted. Now the next match is in the ring. Let's go for the introduction.
All right. So that's actually the last bit of good we're going to hear on the show. Like I said, we don't have a whole lot to play here. But you heard it. So next week, as we've mentioned already, there's going to be a North American title match. Ted DiBiase is going to defend the title against either Paul Orndorff or Bob Roop. Now, keep in mind, this is 1982, because I'm sure there's some people listening to this right now thinking, well, why don't they just do a triple threat? Why don't they just do a three-way? Keep in mind, three-ways didn't really break into the United States for well over another 10 years. I believe the first three-way in the United States was one in Smoky Mountain Wrestling in 1993. They did a three-team, three men on each team match. At least that's the first one of the modern era. I believe three ways have been traced back a lot longer than that, but that's the one that is the first one of the quote unquote modern era. And really, three ways didn't even ECW had their three way. WCW did a few, WWF did a few, but it really wasn't until like 1997 when three ways became a lot more prevalent. Um, and nowadays, it's like it's not even a special match nowadays. Nowadays, it's just this is what it is. But that isn't what happened back in the day. It was all 1-on-1, 2-on-2 matches, etc. And so you don't have Ted DiBiase defending against both Orndorff and Roop. You have him defending against one with the added stipulation that whichever one is not chosen to challenge Paul Orndorff for the North American, to challenge Ted DiBiase for the North American title, the other one is banned from the building. So we're going to see what happens here. We still have 14 minutes left in the show, 14 minutes of airtime, and both of our potential challengers have a match. So let's see how they each fare in their match here and see if that has any bearing on who Grizzly Smith decides will challenge Ted DiBiase. So first up, we have Paul Orndorff going 1-on-1 with Tony Torres, which was an extended squash match. Torres did get a couple seconds of offense, which at least makes sense, because Orndorff may be getting his title match. So Orndorff beat on him for 98% of this match. Torres' best offense in the match was actually moving out of the way of a knee drop from Mr. Wonderful, and Orndorff won with a snap power slam off the ropes. So that's Orndorff. That's how Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff did in his match. Now we go to Bob Roop. And this is the match that was plugged at the beginning of the show. It's Bob Roop in a non-title match with the Mississippi State champion, Mr. Olympia. And again, like I said, this is a non-title match. And we just saw Orndorff win a quick squash match. And now, can Bob Roop do the same? Short answer, no, he cannot. Roop did not fare as well as Orndorff, as Olympia got in a lot more offense against Roop than Torres did to Orndorff. And actually, it makes sense even when you compare the respective experience and talents of Olympia and Torres. Plus, you have Olympia, who's the Mississippi State champion. Tony Torres has always been a bit of an enhancement talent here on the show. Roop got frustrated as the match went on, as he obviously was not faring well. Olympia put on a single leg crab, and Orndorff came to the ring to try to assist Bob Roop, but everyone's favorite Marine, Killer Carl Cox, came out with his truncheon tool. The crowd freaked out again because, I don't know, and it's more than just he's another babyface, because we've had baby faces on this show, obviously, and not that many people get the reaction that Killer Carl Cox is getting. It's honestly a little crazy, if you ask me. Anyway, Cox backed away Orndorff from ringside, and the match continued. And actually, Cox stayed at ringside the rest of the match, and Orndorff went to the back and didn't come back out here. Roop tried to duck out of the ring, and Cox backed him back in there. Roop at one point is begging for a timeout, as Olympia is having his way with it. He gets a near fall with a body slam and gets a series of 2 counts off a flying body press, a drop kick, a forearm, and a sunset flip. This is basically Mr. Olympia taking Bob Roop to school, and the match goes to the time limit, and the show goes off the air without finding out who gets the title shot next week. So Orndorff, as we talked about, he won his match convincingly, while Roop had a rough go of it with Mr. Olympia. However, as mentioned, Orndorff wrestled an enhancement talent while Bob Roop had to wrestle a champion. And so you got to take into account the quality of opponents. Because yes, Bob Roop didn't win, but Bob Roop also didn't lose. So we're going to see next week what happens. Who's going to get the title shot against Ted DiBiase? And more importantly, can either of them beat Ted and win the title? So we're going to have to wait till next week to find out. And, we'll see what happens. And, it's actually next week. Next week is a pretty good show. If it's the show that I'm thinking it is, and I'm pretty sure it is, it's a pretty good little show next week. And, can't wait to talk about it here on our little program. All right, so we've been all over the place tonight, but let's end with some funny stuff. Let's end with some cute stuff. It's time for Weird News of the Week. This is Weird News of the Week presented by Nobody. Nobody, the company that sponsors nothing. And for this, of course, we go to UPI.com. We go to our good friend Ben Hooper as we talk about underwater kiss world record broken for Valentine's Day. So yes, I'm recording this on Valentine's Day regarding what time you actually listen to this. So we're going to do a Valentine's Day themed Weird News of the Week. And this is obviously dated today, February 14th. A South African woman and a Canadian man traveled to the Maldives to break the Guinness World Record for longest underwater kiss ahead of Valentine's Day. Beth Neal, 40, and her fiance Miles Cloutier, 33, locked lips underwater in the Maldives on February 4th and kissed underwater for 4 minutes and 6 seconds. The couple broke the world record previously held by Michelle Fucarino and Elisa Lazena. Man, I should have figured out how to pronounce these names ahead of time. But anyway, those two people kissed underwater for 3 minutes and 24 seconds in 2010. The couple said their successful record attempt came after 3 days of practicing. They took on the record in the pool at the Lux South Airy Atoll Resort. So that's cute, right? And hey, for once it wasn't talking about animals. But all right, so that's going to do it for this week. And, I want to thank everyone for listening. I hope I gave you something to think about, with that whole opening segment. And, I want you to remember, especially if there's somebody out there, who thinks, whatever about trans people, support them, support us, and if you don't, and if you think, what, trans people this, trans people that, I want you to really sit and think to yourself this week why you feel the way you do. And how would you feel if people were going after you because of whatever it is you are? What if there was people murdering cisgender white people just because they're cisgender white people, and it wasn't just a one and done thing, that it was an epidemic that was happening over and over and over again, and we had to have a cisgender white people day of remembrance once a year, and that you walk down the street in fear for your life for something that you weren't, you didn't decide. Oh my God, I'm hooked up again. This, I didn't decide, to be trans. This is something that I am, and we might argue about that. You know what? I really don't give a shit. But I want you to think to yourself, if you hate trans people out there, or you think that we're second-class citizens, or we need to be held down, I want you to think why, and what would happen in your mind if this happened to you. But before I get worked up again, we're going to close things up here. I want to thank everybody again for listening. I hope you have a great rest of your week. And, whatever here, but just take care. And welcome to episode number 028 of Something Else with Aria and Not KJ. My name is Aria, joined as always by Not KJ. And today we're going to be talking about Mid-South Wrestling from March 18th, 1982, from the Irish McNeil Boys Club in Shreveport, Louisiana. And then later on today, we'll have Weird News of the Week, featuring perhaps the worst plane flight I'd ever heard of. Well, one where there was no casualties, of course, but we'll get into that at the end of the show here. But first, a reminder, you are listening to the dulcet tones of my voice, and you can listen to us on many different platforms, including tinyurl.com/somethingelsepod, angrymarks.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Castbox, Overcast, Pod Paradise, Castro, Podbay.fm, Radio Public. And as we say each and every week, these are, in fact, all real places that you can listen to our show. And actually, I found out recently that Overcast, I've never even heard of Overcast before we started doing the show. Overcast, we're getting a lot of listens through there. So if you're listening to us there, thank you so much. If you're not listening to us there or just discovering the show, please consider subscribing. Leave us a 5-star review. In fact, even if you don't want to leave us a 5-star review, if you want to give us a 1-star review, tell us why you think that way, and give us something we can improve on. Like, for instance, if you're tired of listening to me talk about we when it's just me on the show, let me know and I'll work on that. By the way, we are also available on Pocket Casts, which again, another very, very real place. And by the way, if you subscribe to this show, you are going to get to hear the new show I'm going to be starting in a few weeks, a new project I'm working on. Still fuzzy with details, but as soon as I know, I'll fill everybody in. So if you subscribe, you'll not only get this show every week, you'll also get our new show every week. And in my opinion, both shows are well worth going out of your way to listen to. It's a nice way to spend 40 to 60 minutes, once or twice a week. But let's dive in with Mid-South Wrestling here. This is a really big show. We've had some shows, where it's like, okay, we're just treading water here. We're just building up the stuff. This week, we are not treading water. We are not building up the stuff. We are at stuff. That might be the most grammatically incorrect thing I've ever said on the show. But this is a show to watch, a show to listen to the review of. Now, as you all know, every week we play the audio of, interviews or key audio throughout the show. The opening intro of this show is the first 10 minutes of the show. Now, and actually it's just under 9 minutes when we subtract, the first few seconds and the last few seconds, but it's about 9 minutes. Now, the good thing about this is I'm not going to sit here and make you listen to 9 straight minutes of audio. If you like, by all means. But, I'm not going to make you listen to that. There are 3 segments of the opening segment. And so we're going to listen to each part, and I'll come back and we'll talk about that before moving on to the next part. Now, if you recall, last week we were informed that this week Ted DiBiase would defend the North American title against either Bob Roop or Paul Orndorff. We never found out last week who the challenger would be. We're going to find out this week, and we're going to have a title match. But in addition to that, we have a legendary figure in wrestling making his debut on this show. Actually, we have a few people making their debut on the show, but one who is still active in wrestling right now, a well-known face and voice of wrestling. So let's go to Boyd Pierce here to introduce the show, and we'll be back.
Hi, wrestling fans. Welcome to this week's edition of Mid-South Wrestling Television Network. I'm your host, Boyd Pierce, and Grizzly Smith with another outstanding card. It'll be headlined by a North American title match. He promised you that Ted DiBiase would defend his coveted crown against either Paul Orndorff or Bob Roop, and it will be Paul Orndorff. That means that Bob Roop will be barred from the ring during this title match, and should he come to the ring and interfere in any way, not only will Bob Roop be suspended, but also Paul Orndorff will be. You'll notice on my left a new face here on Mid-South Wrestling. He's our guest, and I'll go with some of his background. He's educated from Oklahoma State University and Northeastern State. His name, Jim Ross. Jim, we're glad to have you with us, but continuing his background, the only referee in amateur ranks to referee in the state of Oklahoma, basketball, football, and baseball. That's really something. And he's a national commentator for ESPN Rodeo professionally. He has his own TV wrestling commentary shows in many areas. And ladies and gentlemen, he called me up and he said, Boyd, wherever I go, people are buzzing and talking about the enthusiasm and the great grapplers you have on Mid-South Wrestling, and asked could he come here and watch it in person. And I was only too glad. I invited him not only come here, but he will be our guest commentator. And Jim, we welcome you wholeheartedly.
Well, thank you very much, Boyd. It's certainly a pleasure to be here in this great state. And everywhere I go, and it's really the truth, people are talking about Mid-South wrestling, the wrestling in the Mid-South area. And I know many of you people see wrestling from other parts of the country on the cable and other overlapping television systems. And I think that the proof is there. The greatest wrestlers, the greatest matchups of competition right here in the Mid-South area, and I'm very excited about this great card that matchmaker Grizzly Smith has prepared today. Some of the faces will be new to me, but many of them I've seen before, and it should be a very exciting hour.
Jim, before we get into the actual matches, I'm just a country boy, as all the viewers will tell you. I love them and I appreciate them all, but you can break it down with your knowledge that you have attained. You're a lot smarter than I am. I want you to tell them about the recent surgery of Ernie Ladd and break it down and explain it to them in a way that I'm sure they'll.
All right, so before we go into the next part, we're going to stop right there for a second and talk about our first segment. So yes, it is the debut of Jim Ross as a commentator here. And of course, Jim, as he's introduced in AEW, he's the Hall of Fame voice of wrestling. He's the voice of many people's childhoods, announcing before I was born. So it's like Jim Ross has been in my life for the majority of my life, through one way or the other. And it's really neat seeing him here. He's a young man, somewhere in his early 20s, here in March of 1982, obviously well before he got any of his 3 bouts of Bell's palsy. He's a good-looking young man. Nothing like, no complaints here. And he sounds, and here's the hilarious thing, he sounds pretty much exactly the same as he does now. 40 years, 11 months, and 3 weeks later. Because as I sometimes mention, the show's for 40 years, 1 month, and 1 week ago. And the other thing that they announced is that, yes, Paul Orndorff has been chosen to challenge Ted DiBiase for the North America title. Bob Roop is banned from ringside. They mentioned last week he's banned from the building. So not sure if they're going to go forward entirely with that, to where he was banned entirely. But at the very least, he's not here this week. I'm sorry, I don't think he's not here this week. It's that he's banned from the building during the match. However, you might hear, you've heard there at the end there, Boyd was asking Jim for an update on Ernie Ladd's knee surgery, and Bob Roop was interrupting them. So let's play some audio here and hear what Bob Roop had to say.
Understanding.
Excuse me, Mr. Boyd Pierce. I told Grizzly Smith before the show, I told you, and I want to say it again, because it's very crucial. This past week in the situation for this title match, I felt I was the #1 contender all along, but when Grizzly Smith called me and said, Bob, We evaluated it. We feel like Paul Orndorff was the #1 contender. I took it like I didn't cry, I didn't moan, I didn't whimper. I took it like a man that I am. But something that I know that nobody else out here knows is that there's something really bad has happened to Paul Orndorff this past week. He had a cage match with Ted DiBiase. Now, he asked for the cage match. He wanted to get Ted DiBiase in there with no interference and prove it to everybody once and for all that he was better than Ted DiBiase. You know what happened? He got beat right in the middle. Perfect Paul Orndorff got beat 1, 2, 3. And now, of course, I didn't feel that way, but I guess everybody else felt, well, Ted DiBiase is a much better man than Paul Orndorff when it comes right down to it. I told Paul that DiBiase was just lucky, but I was talking to Paul a couple days ago, and he was really down. You know, the guy feels like he's got a chink in his armor. He's lost his confidence, you might say. He told me, Bob, every time I've gone on TV against Ted DiBiase, he's embarrassed me. I don't win the title. He walks out there looking better than I do. He said, Bob, I don't know if I can stand it. Millions of people watch the show. He says, I don't know if I can stand to go on television one more time and get beat by Ted DiBiase. And, boy, what I'm saying is that I don't think that Paul Orndorff is going to be here today. And I'm #2 trying harder. I want the match. Now, you're the voice of Mid-South Sports, and I want you to help me out here.
Bob, I can't help you or anybody else. I've explained it to you week after week. You've come here. Other grafters have come here. I have nothing to do with it. I'm a host of this program. Grizzly Smith is official matchmaker for Mid-South Wrestling, and we are partial. In no way, that's between you and him. I have nothing to do with it whatsoever. You had no reason to come.
Boy, you don't understand. I said I didn't think so, but I can almost guarantee Paul Orndorff isn't going to be here today. I mean, it's going to be all messed up. I want the match.
Bob, you have a match against Killer Carl Cox. Paul Orndorff has a title match going for the North American belt held by Ted DiBiase. That's the way it is. It'll be between you and Grizzly Smith.
I'm going to talk to
That's Grizzly. All right.
Alrighty. So Bob Roop is here. He said he didn't cry or whimper. He's happy for Paul Orndorff getting the title shot against Ted DiBiase. However, something really bad has happened with Orndorff. During a recent cage match he had with Ted DiBiase, Orndorff got beaten, and Paul got really down and depressed afterwards. He lost his confidence. Roop is saying that Paul Orndorff, the #1 contender to Ted DiBiase's North American title, may not be here tonight. And of course, Roop, if his friend, Paul Orndorff isn't going to be here this week, Bob Roop wants to be here. He wants that title shot. Boyd points out to him that he has a match with Killer Carl Cox, but Roop is thinking about us, the wrestling fans. We're excited to have a North American title match, and now we may not get it because Orndorff's not here, and by the time he isn't going to show up. He asked Boyd for help with all this, but Boyd, of course, pointed out that he has nothing to do with it. Grizzly Smith is the matchmaker, and that he needs to go talk to Grizzly Smith. So that's something to keep an eye out here, because biggest match, not of his career, but biggest match. This match we've been building since the first episode of Something Else from, December of '81. They've been building up this rivalry with Ted DiBiase versus Bob Roop and Paul Orndorff. This is the culmination of 3 months of wrestling and 3 months of storyline. And, now Paul Orndorff on the big day, he may not show up. He may be having a mental breakdown. What's going to happen here? Before we get back to that, we might as well jump back in here with our announcers, Boyd and Jim. And they're going to be talking about Ernie Ladd's knee surgery. This one is a little long. We're going to let it play, and then I'll be back afterwards to talk about it.
I'm sorry for the interference. As we get back to you now about explaining the technicalities of the injury and the surgery to Ernie Ladd, please.
Well, as most of the wrestling fans know, Ernie Ladd suffered a very severe injury at the hands of General Skandar Akbar's one-man gang. And, of course, Ernie had several surgeries before through the illustrious National Football League career that he had, the great football player that he was. Even though he's controversial in the rings at times, he still is a tremendous athlete. Well, this knee was torn up, just a terrible, terrible injury. But Dr. James Andrews, a very renowned orthopedic specialist who has operated on such people as wrestlers the fans will know as Tommy Rich, Paul Ellering. He's also operated on Fran Tarkenton, the former quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. He did the surgery. The thing to remember about the surgery is that the convalescent time is very, very quick. I'll talk a little bit more about that, Boyd, but right now I think the fans will be interested to see this film. And before we show it, this is an actual operation being done. And if you are a little bit weak stomach, a little squeamish, you might want to turn your head on some of the scenes. But this is the actual operation as it took place. Let's run that film now. Wrestling fans, on February the 26th in Columbus, Georgia at the Houston Orthopedic Clinic, Dr. James Andrews operated on the injured leg of Ernie Ladd. And as this operation takes place, this key footage, and we will have some parts of this film that may be a little bit squeamish to some members of the family, but there you see the telescopic device being inserted directly into the knee of the 6'9" former Grambling football star Ernie Ladd. As the natural fluids come out of the knee, the lubricant caused by the bursa sac in the knee to keep the knee naturally lubricated, and the telescopic device being put right in, and we'll be able to see inside the knee momentarily. The surgical device, the cutting device on the bottom side of the knee, we won't see that. And now as the camera moves up, you can see the television screen in the foreground on your screen, and there we are right inside the knee, and there you see the cutting device, the scraping device has already been inserted, a very small incision made into the knee, and the microscope, you can see exactly as the same thing that the orthopedic surgeons are seeing. They're operating through the television screen. They have gone inside the knee and they're scraping away at the damaged calcium deposits, the torn cartilage, and other debris in the knee caused by the tremendous amount of punishment by General Skandar Akbar's one-man gang. And Ernie Ladd has had 9 previous knee surgeries, a great athlete, and this surgery, of course, was the most delicate of all the knee surgeries he's had in the past. They're searching for damaged tissue in the knee, the fine fibers, the fine peach fuzz-like material inside the knee is the damaged nerve ends, there's damaged cartilage, damaged tissue in the leg, and this is all being scraped away from the leg and sucked through a suction device out of the knee. And in hopes of doing this, they will repair some of the damage and most of the damage that was inflicted by the one-man gang. A very delicate operation, the same type of operation that has been performed on such great athletes as Fran Tarkenton of the Minnesota Vikings, professional wrestlers Tommy Rich and Paul Ellering, and now the surgery is complete. They're wrapping Ernie Ladd's leg, and in hopes that he will get back on the recovery trail on a successful surgery. That's Ernie Ladd's operation. One point I'd like for the wrestling fans to remember, this operation took several hours and performed very successfully, I might add, by Dr. James Andrews. The operation in the film edited down to where we could show it on this portion of the Mid-South Sports. The operation did take several hours. It was very successful. And, Boyd, the main thing that the fans should remember about this type of surgery is that the convalescent time, the recovery time in common terms, is very, very quick. The very next day after this surgery was complete, Ernie Ladd started his rehabilitation. He's back on the way to rehabilitating that leg. He has come back from it before. He's a great athlete, and I think we're going to hear more from Ernie Ladd in the future.
Right, Jim, and Ernie Ladd was here 2 weeks ago. He was on crutches. He made an interview, so let's listen.
All right, so they're going to play the Ernie Ladd promo from 2 weeks ago that we heard. But anyway, so Ernie Ladd had his knee surgery, and in case you're not watching along on the network or on Peacock or whatever, they actually show real footage from Ernie Ladd's knee surgery right here on Mid-South Wrestling. And it wasn't super graphic. There was no blood or anything, but it was knee surgery. And anyone who's ever watched those surgery channels that usually air hardcore surgery right around dinner time, they know that what it looks like. It really doesn't look that exciting. But by the way, James Andrews is 80 years old today, and he is still performing operations. It is the same James Andrews, the famous knee surgeon, orthopedic surgeon that we heard for a decade plus more on WWE every time someone got a knee injury. He is still practicing medicine now in 2023. By the way, I did look up, Jim Ross is 30 years old in this episode of Mid-South. he looks a lot younger than 30. We'll just leave it at that. So they continue to give credit to General Skandar Akbar's one-man gang, who, yes, finally has a name, the one-man gang. After the promo with Ernie from 2 weeks ago, we go back to the desk with Boyd, where he's going to recap what we just saw.
Jim Ross, you know Ernie Ladd. I know Ernie Ladd. The fans know Ernie Ladd. And whether you approve of what he does inside the ring, that has nothing to do. He has his own style. If something happened to him and you listen, but he's a dominating force in any sport that he participates in. And you can count on his Skandar Akbar somewhere, someplace. You'll have to answer to him. We'll be back with more exciting action after we pause for this word from Mid-South Wrestling.
All right, so they go to commercial, they come back, and basically they recap everything with the one-man gang, how he laid out Ernie Ladd, and then a few weeks later, on February 23rd, he laid out and injured Dick Murdoch during a tag team match. By the way, if you're hearing that phone, I apologize for that. Another spam caller, because that's what you need in life, is more spam callers. So yeah, and the big splash off the top rope to Dick Murdoch, injured Dick Murdoch. He's unable to wrestle right now. And so the one-man gang is on a rampage. And let's go back to Boyd Pierce now to recap what we just saw with everything.
Ernie Ladd was injured, and you saw him when he had his surgery. You heard what he had to say. You saw Dick Murdoch, the fabulous Texan, was injured. The man who was responsible for it all, the man who caused it. We referred and asked General Skandar Akbar. He never had anything to say to us, but that man is in the ring right now, the one-man gang. So let's go to the ring for the introduction.
This event is for one fall with a 10-minute time limit. In the red corner, at 6 feet 10 inches tall, 454 pounds, General Skandar Akbar presents his one-man gang. And in the blue corner, at 236 pounds from Richmond, Virginia, Buddy Landell.
Poor Boudreaux. He draws a short stick for the debut of the one-man gang here. Now, this one-man gang, if the only time you ever saw him was in WWF in the late 90s, or even, the late 80s, or even in WCW and ECW in the 90s, it's a very different looking one-man gang. No tattoos on his arms. He's got long hair instead of just a mohawk, and he's wearing a full body singlet instead of the t-shirt and, tights that he wore, that he'd be more famous for knowing later on in of his other major company runs. So Buddy Landell here drawing the short straw against one-man gang. Landell, who Boyd Pierce calls Mandel. At one point he tries to slap on a front face lock, but he gets heaved across the ring, and one-man gang wins with a big splash. Next up, it is Bob Roop versus Killer Carl Cox. Let's play the intro because Bob Roop has more to say, this time to Reeser Bowden.
This event is for one fall with a 10-minute time limit. In the red corner, at 252 pounds from Blacksburg, Virginia, Bob Roop.
Reeser, wait a minute. Maybe you can help me, man. I try to tell these guys over here, Paul Orndorff isn't going to be here today, and I shouldn't wrestle in this match because I might get picked, if he doesn't show up or something, I might get picked to take his place against Ted DiBiase. Killer Carl Cox is a tough guy. I don't want to be wrestling against him, and then maybe have to come back to help me. Reeser, help me do something.
He's tough, all right.
Can you help me? Get this match changed or something?
I'm afraid not.
You can't help me?
You've signed for this match, Bob.
Yes, but I'm trying to tell you this.
Well, there you
Reeser is just, in many ways, Reeser is just an awful announcer, but like so many other ways, he's just amazing. He just sits there and he's like, Bob Roop's like, Killer Cox is a tough guy, and Reeser's just like, yes, he is, and it's like, it's just tremendous. It's like Reeser Bowden. It's like, I wish, he had more of a part in, something more national, or if he would have been one of those people that would get brought back, occasionally, because it's just like, he's just, he's awesome. He's got his own style, which you do not see these days. And I mean, when was the last time you really saw a ring announcer that was a little different, a little out there, a little wacky? And things like that, they stand out. Like the WWE announcers right now, they have great voices, much better than Reeser, much better than myself. But 5 years from now, are you going to remember their names? Do you remember their names right now? Exactly. But anyway, so Bob Roop is pleading with Reeser to do something about the situation. Orndorff's not here. He may need to now challenge Ted DiBiase for the North American title. And he's just pacing around. And here's the key. He's very nervous. He's very hyper. And, it's almost like he's worried that they're running out of time. And they're not. They still have half a show to go at this point. But, Bob Roop, he wants to conserve his energy, in case he has to get a North American title match, But Cox comes out with his trenching shovel and is still weirdly popular. Fans in Mid-South are just weird, I think. He goes around, shakes the hands of everybody in the front row. Bob Roop attacks him before the bell, but Cox makes his comeback. Killer Carl is so into this match, he throws the cap into the crowd, which Boyd said, this shows how much he's into it because he doesn't see where his cap goes. Roop at one point goes for a drop toe hold, but Killer Carl just steps over it and hits a lifting knee when Roop stands up. Killer Carl finish was a bit wacky here. Killer Carl gets tied up in the ropes, but while he was tied up in the ropes, the referee was over trying to get him out, but he turns around as Bob Roop is charging towards him, and the referee, instead of just stepping out of the way, he takes a full-on bump. He flies he flies onto the mat, and he was never hit, not even pretended to be hit, but he takes a wild bump to get out of the way of Bob Roop charging. By the way, Killer Carl was able to get out of the ropes, hit the Brain Buster, and pick up the win. So Bob Roop is not having a good day here. His friend Paul Orndorff, has disappeared, and now he loses his match to Killer Carl Cox. In the match, if you recall, got set up last week. Actually, it's a rematch from last week with Killer Carl, I believe. Then we got the Samoans, managed by General Skandar Akbar, versus Terry Gibbs and Jesse Barr. It was pointed out that this is a non-title match. The Samoans are the tag team champions. So just in case you thought Gibbs and Barr were the top contenders, they're not. This was just an out-and-out squash match. Barr was there to get his butt kicked and make the Samoans look good in the process, and that's what he did. Barr got beaten to and fro. His only offense was trying to get to the corner. Finally, he was able to make the hot tag. Gibbs comes in, a house on fire. He throws a few punches at the Samoans, but then gets laid out with a Samoan drop, and the Samoans pick up the win. Alrighty, so now it's time. This is the match we've been waiting months for. The match has been built up since the very first episode of Something Else. Ted DiBiase defending the North American Championship against Paul Orndorff. Or
a title match for the North American Heavyweight Championship. This event is for one fall or remaining television time. In the red corner at 252 pounds from Blacksburg, Virginia, Bob Roop. And in the blue corner, also at 252 pounds from Omaha, Nebraska, the North American Heavyweight Champion, Ted DiBiase.
There it is. This is a North American Heavyweight Championship match, and apparently Bob Roop was right when he came to our table. Paul Orndorff did not show up. Grizzly Smith, the matchmaker, had promised us a North American Heavyweight title match here on television. Bob Roop was the #2 challenger, and so it looks like he gets his chance. As you saw the introduction, and Alfred Neely called for the bell. A title match. Ted DiBiase defending his coveted belt of North America against the challenge of Bob Roop. former AAU champion, amateur great from Southern Illinois University. And now he's going for the big one, the North American belt that he's wanted so many times, and with such graciousness, he really wants it, Jim.
So, Paul Orndorff, don't know what happened. Apparently, he went into a deep depression when he lost a cage match a few weeks ago to Ted DiBiase on a live event, or it was last week actually. He lost a cage match, and he was in such a deep depression that he did not show up this week for his title match. We ended up with Bob Roop, who just wrestled his match against Killer Carl Cox, not even 10 minutes earlier. And now here he is getting the title match against Ted DiBiase. And, much like we've seen the last few weeks with Bob Roop got his butt kicked. He got thrown all over the place. Ted DiBiase had the match won with a punch to the face, but unfortunately for him, it was near the ropes. So Roop was able to get his foot across it and put a stop to it. Roop finally breaks the eyes of the champ to take over. They both went for the figure 4 at different points. They both got out of it. JR compares Roop to Tom Landry of the Dallas Cowboys when DiBiase hits a big power slam and locks on the figure 4. However, in that angle we saw in episode 1, where Bob Roop and Paul Orndorff were working on a counter to the figure 4, Roop breaks out the counter. It's the counter that everybody knows. They just turn over to their stomach, and magically the pain shifts from Roop to DiBiase. And, got to turn over again. They end up in the ropes. And now Ted is pulling Roop back out into the center, and we're going to play the audio of the finish of the match. Now, Ted has they've just broke up the figure 4. Ted is pulling Bob out to the middle of the ring, and let's go from there.
That match when he grabbed that steel cable on the bottom strand to cause it to be broken, and there you see Alfred Neely slammed outside the ring on the cement floor.
The referee has hit the concrete floor. The referee has hit the concrete floor, and DiBiase has taken a lot of punishment on that leg.
As a one-man gang, Jim.
The one-man gang.
Akbar, who's giving the directions.
454 pounds, Boyd. He is really wrenching that leg. Look at DiBiase's face.
That is a steel ring post. You've seen him wrapping it around.
He's trying to break DiBiase's leg. All 454
on the far side, he's still out. Alfred Neely, the referee, unable to see anything, being thrown out on the far side. Now you see Roop now, as he himself goes for the finishing hold. If he can hold it, the injured Ted DiBiase really being worked over by the one-man gang.
Roop looks very confident at this point. DiBiase has sustained an unbelievable amount of pressure from General Skandar Akbar's one-man gang. DiBiase, you can hear him, Boyd, all the way over here. He's yelling in pain. This match it's on the line right here for Ted DiBiase. It's on the line right here. And Roop has got the hold of figure 4 locked in. DiBiase may be unconscious. DiBiase's out.
Alfred Neely called for the bell.
The referee has stopped the match. Boy, it looks like this could be a very unique situation. The referee has stopped the match.
He gets the bell. What do they do with it?
The referee's decision goes to Bob Roop. The referee's decision stopping the match to hopefully prevent permanent injury to Ted DiBiase. And right here in Mid-South, Boyd, we've got a new Mid-South, new North American champion.
That's right, and everybody but the referee saw what happened. The big man, the one-man gang, under the direction of Skandar Akbar is responsible. We'll be back. The Junkyard Dog and Mr. Olympia versus Tully Blanchard and Mike Boyer after this word from Mid-South Wrestling Television Network.
So, yes, we have a new North American champion. So to recap what we just heard, Ted goes for the figure 4 again after he pulled, he pulled Roop from the ropes. Ted kicks him off, and DiBiase flies with the referee. The referee goes flying out of the ring. And from there, the one-man gang of all people, the one-man gang comes running to the ring and attacks Ted DiBiase. He pulls him into the ring post. He slams his knee multiple times into that hard metal post. And then he runs off. As the referee wakes back up, Bob Roop pulls DiBiase in the middle of the ring, slaps on the figure 4. DiBiase never submitted. He passed out to the figure 4, and that was it. Due to referee stoppage, Bob Roop is your new North American champion. And what a turn of events we have here. After everything, after Paul Orndorff really was the number 1 contender, and any claim Bob Roop ever really had to it would have gone out the window, when he did the job for Carl Cox earlier in this episode. But all of that is done for. Bob Roop stands tall as the king of Mid-South Wrestling. The king is dead. Long live the new king of Mid-South Wrestling, Bob Roop, the North American Heavyweight Champion. We then go to our first standby match. It is Junkyard Dog and Mr. Olympia, or as I wrote in my notes, My Olympia. My Olympia. Doesn't have the same ring to it, huh? Anyway, they go 2-on-2 with Mike Boyer and, yes, Tully Blanchard. Yes, the same Tully Blanchard who would go on to become one of the Horsemen and one of the more legendary wrestlers from the 80s, teaming with Mike Boyer, who would go on to become Mike Boyette and not one of the most legendary wrestlers from the 80s. And this was fast-paced, and it was fast going from the bell here. Tully and Boyer attacked before the bell, and it's on. By the way, the bell never even rang to start the match. Tully at one point covered the Dog, and Dog pressed him 3 feet in the air to kick out. And while the bell never rang to start the match, it definitely did to end the match, as JYD pinned Boyer with the thumb. And that match probably went like 45 to 60 seconds. But as the match comes to an end, we have some big breaking news. Let's go to the audio here.
Wait a minute. Jim Ross, there's Paul Orndorff just now coming in the building.
Paul Orndorff is right here in the studio.
Paul Orndorff coming by the ring. Undoubtedly, he doesn't know his match has already been held. He's missed the match before. I never thought he'd do it again. The winners, you saw Mr. Olympia and the Junkyard Dog. We're going to check on Paul Orndorff and find out what's going on. And we'll be back after this word from Mid-South Wrestling. We'll be right back.
So Paul Orndorff has finally arrived at the arena for his title match here at the end of the show, after the match has already happened. And they mention, and they don't elaborate on this, but they mentioned that Paul Orndorff had missed a match last year. And so they thought that this would never happen again. And hey, it happened again. So let's go now to the big interview. Paul Orndorff, why did you miss the match? What's going on? Are you depressed? What's going on, Paul?
Ladies and gentlemen, our next standby match, Iron Mike Sharp versus Rick Ferreira. But because of the skullduggery, the skulldoggery, whatever, who cares about the right adjective at this time? The man it happened to knocked him out of a chance at the coveted belt, Paul Orndorff.
You better believe it, too. I got something to say. Everybody out there knows what kind of a man I am. When I have a match, I show up regardless. Now, you know, something happened to me a few months ago that I got robbed out of a match. I got cheated out of it. Well, that's here and gone and done with. But you people out there know right now that I just got through running about 6 blocks to get here. Because when I got in my car to crank it up, it wouldn't even turn over. Now, I don't know who did this, but I got a good idea. And I'm sure that Ted DiBiase had something to do with it, or had somebody to sabotage my car, because he had everything to gain. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. DiBiase. It all backfired, because I had a little plan for you anyway. I had a little one-man gang plan for you to start with, but that makes no difference, because I hear that Bob Roop just won the North American belt from you, and that's what counts. That's the only thing that counted, I thought. But as I ran through here and went up to the dressing room, I had one of the guys say, Paul, we hear you're not going to be here because I want to congratulate Bob Roop. Bob Roop wasn't up in the dressing room, was taking a shower. And the guy said, Paul, what happened? Bob Roop said you wasn't going to be here, that you flipped out, you're in the nut house. Well, let me tell you something right now. I wasn't in no nut house. Something happened to me. Very bad, and it hurts me so bad I can't stand it. And then it all dawned on me. Who had all this to gain? Bob Roop. You know something? It takes an ignition to get to my truck, to my hood. Just so happens I went through Bob Roop's pockets because he's in there bragging about how he outsmarted me. Well, right there, the keys. That's part of that keys right there. And not only that, a car doesn't start without this little thing right here. You see this right here? Bob Roop, you think you're pretty smart. You backstab me, brother. The man.
Oh, we got to go. Till next week, goodbye, everybody, from Mid-South Wrestling.
One way or the other. You got my belt, boy, and you will pay.
All right, so a lot to digest there. Paul Orndorff, he thought that Ted DiBiase had something to do with it. His car did not start. He had to run 6 blocks to the arena. Arrived late, obviously. He, he went, his car wouldn't turn over, it wouldn't start. However, he's happy for his friend Bob Roop. Bob Roop went in and he won the North American title. He mentions that he had a plan for Ted DiBiase that involved the one-man gang. So there's that. Plus, then he goes to the heel locker room, and the guys couldn't believe he was there. Bob Roop said he cracked up. He'd locked up. He was institutionalized. But here he is. And suddenly, who was the person that gained the most? It wasn't Ted DiBiase, the honorable champion who'd been defending his title for months on end. It was Bob Roop. And so Orndorff goes to his bag, or goes to his clothes, and finds the key to his car. Or not so much the key to his car, the key to, where his engine is, where his ignition is. And not only that, apparently Roop was able to pull, I believe that's the starter out of the car. And so Bob Roop sabotaged his friend Paul Orndorff to prevent Paul from coming to the arena to challenge for the North American title. And so Bob Roop, in order to get everything, he lost his friendship, he lost his trust, all for the North American Championship. And so that does it for this week's episode of Mid-South. So a fantastic episode, beginning to end. Just excellent episodic storytelling at its finest. And so here's what we have now. Bob Roop is your North American champion, but now he has a new enemy in Paul Orndorff. Plus, Ted DiBiase is going to want his title back. Plus, what does General Skandar Akbar and the one-man gang have to do with this? So this is all setting up all these future storylines, all these future episodes, and was a big angle, especially with the big Superdome show coming up on May 8th. It's March 18th, and we're starting to get an idea of who the top feuds are, what may be going on May 8th. But we'll tune in next week and see what happens from there. Alrighty then. So it's now time for Weird News of the Week. That's Weird News of the Week presented by Nobody. Nobody, the company that sponsors nothing. And of course, as always, when we do our Weird News of the Week, we go to upi.com, and written by Ben Hooper, our good friend Ben Hooper. I really should email him and see if we can get him on the show. But plane spends 16 hours in the air and ends up back at the same New Zealand airport. I feel this one. I feel this one in my bones. When I went to Sydney, Australia, it was like 5-6 years ago at this point. The flight from Boston to LA was 7 or 8 hours, but the flight from LA to Sydney, Australia was 15 hours. And even though, you know, at the end of the day, like once he accepted that it was 15 hours, it wasn't really that bad. But if we had left LA and 15 hours later we're back in LA, I wouldn't have been too thrilled about it. But let's go to the story here. February 17th, passengers on a flight from New Zealand to New York spent 16 hours in the air just to end up at the same airport where their journey began. The Air New Zealand nonstop flight from Auckland to New York had been in the air for about 8 hours Thursday, and it was about 2,000 miles from California when the airline received word that an electrical fire at New York's JFK International Airport had led to Terminal 1 being closed. The airline said the decision was made for the plane to turn around and return to Auckland, where it landed about 16 hours after departing. Diverting to another U.S. port would have meant the aircraft would remain on the ground for several days, impacting a number of other scheduled services and customers, an airline spokeswoman told the New Zealand Herald. Terminal 1 remained closed Friday while crews repaired the issues caused by the electrical fire. The airline apologized to passengers and said those aboard the flight would be booked on the next available flights to New York. So yeah, that is that's a crazy airline story because, like I said, 16 hours just end up in the same spot you started at. That is not good. That is not fun at all. But you know what is good and fun? This here radio show. So we're going to close things up for this week. I want to thank everybody for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I enjoyed talking about it. And we will see what happens in the land of Mid-South in 7 days. Until then, I will talk at you later. Hello and welcome to episode number 029 of Something Else with Aria and Not KJ. My name is Aria, joined as always by Not KJ. Welcome to the show. Thank you all for listening, wherever you may be in this fine, happy, wacky little world that we live in currently. Yeah. So before we jump in, just a reminder, before we jump into Mid-South Wrestling from March 25th, 1982, please check us out if you haven't already and subscribe to us on our miscellaneous streaming services. You can catch it at tinyurl.com/somethingelsepod. We're also on angrymarks.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Castbox, Overcast, Pod Paradise, Castro, Podbay.fm, Radio Public, and Pocket Casts. They're all real places. Please subscribe, give us a 5-star review, tell your friends, tweet us about us, Facebook about us, TikTok about us, post it on MySpace if that's still a thing. Share the love, share the information, get the word out about our show. I greatly appreciate it. And just a reminder, if you do subscribe to this show, not only will you get this weekly Something Else show, which drops typically on Mondays or Tuesdays, or Fridays, depending on what site you're listening on. You also get the new project I'm going to be working on that'll be dropping in just a few weeks. I'll tell you more about that as it comes along. But yes, for one subscription, you get 2 shows, which doesn't sound like that big of a deal when you have some podcasting networks giving you like 15 shows a week. But I'm just one person. Don't need to listen to me 15 times a week. I don't want to listen to me 15 times a week. Why on earth would you want to? But anywho, we're here at the Irish McNeil Boys Club in Shreveport, Louisiana. It is 40 years, 11 months, and 1 day ago, March 25th, 1982, which probably tells you that what day I'm actually recording this on. But So Mid-South Wrestling, you might recall last week as we jump in, it was the famous angle where Paul Orndorff was scheduled to challenge for the North American title. However, he did not make it to the building. So Bob Roop filled in for him since Bob Roop is his good friend and the number 2 contender. Roop filled in for him. One-man gang helped him out, and Roop won the title. But the show ended with Paul Orndorff showing up and discovering that his good friend Bob Roop had sabotaged his car, and Orndorff wasn't able to get to the arena in time for this title match. So that was last week. We're going to kick things off with Boyd Pierce, and he's going to be here with Jim Ross again this week. I'm going to play the audio of the intro. I want you to take notice of the fact that Boyd doesn't seem to know what Jim Ross's name is for a couple seconds here. But let's go to that right now to kick things off.
Edition of Mid-South Wrestling Television Network. I'm your host, Boyd Pierce, and listen to this. A great card headlined by a tag team match. It'll be a non-title match, but a wild battle nevertheless, as the Mid-South Tag Team Champions Alpha and Sika, the Samoan Warriors, versus the Junkyard Dog and Killer Carl Cox. The Mississippi State Champion is here, Mr. Olympia versus Tully Blanchard. Also, Paul Orndorff, Bob Roop, the big one-man gang, they're all here, so lots of action. And last week, we had a great guest commentator in the person of Big Jim. I'm telling you, Jim Ross, it's a pleasure. Last week, never did I even realize when I asked you to come down here that we'd see such excitement as you saw in Mid-South Wrestling, but it don't prove that it was not only a physical contact sport in professional wrestling, it turned out to be a battle of the mental minds, because apparently last week before that title match, sometime during the week, Paul Orndorff and Bob Roop had a strategy conference with Skandar Akbar and also the big one-man gang, and it turned out to backfire on them with a double cross existed.
A double cross indeed, Boyd, and of course the plan was a foolproof plan. The plan was executed very perfectly. The championship belt did change hands. Ted DiBiase suffered a very severe knee injury. We don't know exactly the extent of that injury yet, but one thing that we do need to remind the fans that, and we're going to see that VTR here momentarily, that Ted DiBiase did not give up, nor was he pinned. The referee's decision stopped the match. That's the great credit of a tremendous athlete in Ted DiBiase. And Boyd, the plan, the double cross, the foolproof plan worked, except for one exception. The man that was supposed to walk out with the belt was Paul Orndorff, according to the plan. Bob Roop thought otherwise. It was an exciting match, and Boyd, we had that on film, and I think that the fans will be interested in seeing that now.
We'll see that because Bob Roop was so certain that Paul Orndorff wouldn't be here, and he wasn't here, so let's watch it right now.
All right, so they go to a recap of last week's North American title match between Bob Roop and Ted DiBiase. But as you heard me mention, Boyd Pierce forgets Jim Ross's name. And if you watch along and you watch the video, you'll see Boyd quickly glance down at his papers to figure out what Jim's name is. And they go from there. But Boyd talks about our main event tonight, which is the Samoans, which is Junkyard Dog and Killer Carl Cox. And then they talk about Bob Roop's double cross and Paul Orndorff from last week. Big Jim talks about how Ted DiBiase did not give up. And that's one of those things that it's like, I would say it's an 80s and 90s thing, but really it was still going on into the Cena era. It's like baby faces don't submit. And that's always gets reiterated over and over again, that a true hero, a true baby face, they don't give up. Unlike those wimpy UFC fighters who will give up instead of just letting someone break, one of their bones. But a real hero like Ted DiBiase, he does not submit to puny wrestling moves that could break his legs. Dang. So we come back to the desk, and I'm going to play some audio. It's just under 3 minutes long, where Boyd and Big Jim sum up what we just saw, and then they pitch to, what they claim is a post-show interview with Paul Orndorff that wasn't seen last week, and I'll go over, what really happened, as we move on with the show, but let's go to that right now.
Jim Ross, they did prove once again there's no honor among thieves. And last week we interviewed Paul Orndorff after everything was over, and he was hot, hot, hot. I mean H-O-T hot. But he kind of simmered down a little bit. I had an interview just before we went on the air. Let's listen to what he had to say right now.
This man certainly needs no introduction, but Paul Orndorff does have something that he feels needs to be said.
That's right. Let me tell you something right now. Everybody knows out there by now what happened. Everybody knows that I had a title match with Ted DiBiase, and that Bob Roop, supposedly my friend, just like Ted DiBiase said about him, he's no good, he's a coward, he's a backstabber, and I'll tell you what, DiBiase, you said one thing that was true, and it's that. But Bob Roop is the man that deliberately got my core wire out of my car so I couldn't make this to have my title shot. Well, let me tell you something, Roop. It was my plan to start with me and Akbar. We all four got together. The one-man gang, Roop and myself. I should have walked out of that ring. It should have been my match. It should have been my belt. Well, let me tell you something right now, Mr. Bob Roop. You have messed with the wrong man, my man. Because when I get upset, things happen. And I don't care, Bob Roop, where it's at, when, and how. Because when I step into that ring with you, you got something to belong at me. The only reason I stay in the Mid-South area is to be the North American champion. And I've been gypped out of it 2 times now. Jake Roberts and now Mr. Bob Roop, so supposedly my friend. Well, what he done is he used my muscle and my ability. He used his brains to only benefit himself. Well, I can assure you, Mr. Bob Roop, I know what kind of a man you are. And boy, let me tell you something. You're going to wish this day had never came. Because when I get in that ring with you, sooner or later, you're going to have to face me. Because when you do, I'm going to kick your booty from one end of this ring and to the other. Because I will be the North American champion, one way or the other.
There you have it.
Boy, those are some very strong words from a very angry man. Of course, you talked to Paul Orndorff last week, and he was very upset, very distraught. Matchmaker Grizzly Smith thought he would have calmed down a little bit in the interlude. However, he has not. I think definitely we have not heard the last from Paul Orndorff and Bob Roop. That's going to be a tremendous confrontation.
And knowing Paul Orndorff's temper, he'll be really after Bob Roop. You can mark that down in your book right now. The first match is in the ring. Let's go for the introduction.
You know, Boyd was not lying. Paul Orndorff was hot, hot, hot. H-O-T, hot. Which, you know, when they spell out the word, that means you're really hot. You know, or if you say hot with a capital H. But, so you heard the interview, and it's important to show that, like, this may be the start of a Paul Orndorff babyface turn, but it's not full-blown babyface. He blatantly admits to the fact they had a plan, you know, with Skandor Akbar and One Man Gang to screw Ted DiBiase out of the North American title. And the plan went, you know, everything went according to the plan. Akbar and One Man Gang came out, they attacked DiBiase's knee and led to a title change. He mentions that he's been gypped out of the North American title twice now. Once was to Jake Roberts, which was before we started watching the show. And Bob Roop won because he used the plan, he used the brains of Paul Orndorff, and instead of using it to benefit both of them, both the team, he used it to benefit only himself. And he finished up by threatening to kick Bob Roop's booty. Because it's 1982, you can only say booty or butt. Neither really sound like something a kick-ass babyface would say. But then we get our first match. It is Paul Orndorff, and by the way, I should mention that I was mistaken. Although Boyd was a little confused when he was saying it. That interview was apparently taped before the show started and not last week, although they, you know, Boyd basically said both, but we'll see at the start of this match that it was definitely taped this week. In fact, I believe it was taped after this match, after our opening match, because that promo, Orndorff was sweaty and obviously had just finished his match. And, you know, here we are with the match, Paul Orndorff versus Coco Samoa. The story of the match is that Orndorff's head was somewhere else. Even though he's wrestling Samoa, he's obsessed over Bob Roop, and it caused him to be a step off early on. He did, however, manage to cut Samoa off with a hot shot. Coco Samoa made a brief comeback, but Orndorff won with a power slam off the ropes. And Coco Samoa, he'd picked up a few wins over the few weeks that we've seen him. So he's not quite the beating an enhancement talent thing that you would normally have here. But Orndorff picks up another big win, and it becomes more obvious that Orndorff, if you go back about a month, they've been working on the Paul Orndorff babyface turn. He was the kick-ass part of the team. He would come out and win his matches convincingly, and then Bob Roop would come out and get thrown all over the ring, get his butt kicked, and at best barely survive. At worst, Roop would do the job. Speaking of Bob Roop, he's out here next for a scheduled match with Buddy Landel, but poor Boudreaux doesn't get to wrestle this week. Hopefully he still got paid. But Orndorff stormed to the ring and demanded Landel, Reeser, and the referee get out of the ring. They all did. So, they all listened to reason. And Orndorff goes after Roop. Alfred Neely, the referee, did go over to the announcers, to go over to Boyd, and reiterate that this is not an official match. The fans, even though you could argue Orndorff isn't a full-blown babyface yet, the fans are ready to embrace Paul Orndorff. And especially in 1982, it's like, and we can argue all day long and all year long about the believability factor of it, but it's like that's all it took in the 80s for the fans to love you. Sometimes is just flip the switch. Now you're a babyface, even though you were the hated heel last week that everybody wanted to see get your butt kicked. This week you're fighting on the side of good, and we love you for it. And that's what's happening here as Orndorff just lays waste to our North American champion, Bob Roop. Alfred Neely, while talking to Boyd, was calling for wrestlers to come out and break it up. And so we got Mike Boyer, Rick Ferreira, and Tully Blanchard all came out at different points to try to break it up. And each time, Orndorff kicked all their butts. But Roop did get the chance to bolt when Blanchard came out. And they lived to fight another day. We go to commercial, we come back and have an actual match. Iron Mike Sharp versus the ugliest wrestler in Mid-South Wrestling, Mike Boyer. I'm going to play a little back and forth here between Boyd and JR. And they start with one of the most obvious comments you've ever heard on a wrestling show, summing up what we just saw. But, let's play it anyway.
Bob Roop made. He was forced to. You saw what happened when Paul Orndorff had no business even being here. He'd already had his match. But that does not change the championship status of the North American title. Bob Roop is still the North American heavyweight title. The only way Paul Orndorff has a shot, it'll have to be a sanctioned match inside the ring for Paul Orndorff to gain that title from Bob Roop. And, well, personally, Jim, it does my old heart good when these thick as thieves partners, they battle each other. It just does something inside of you.
There's no honor among thieves, as the old saying goes, Boyd. And of course, the best laid plans of mice and men go astray from time to time. And what we have in this situation is a man with a great mental capacity. I'm talking about Bob Roop, who just was one step ahead of the competition. But the competition caught him in this last match, and I think that was the first confrontation of some very serious dealings that will be going on between those two great athletes.
So Boyd reiterates that despite what we just saw, Bob Roop is still the North American champion, in case you were really stupid and thought that, a pre-match beatdown constituted a title change. I it's one of those things sometimes you gotta commentate to the lowest common denominator. So, sometimes you gotta say what might be really, really stupid. But there might be somebody out there who said, man, Bob Roop went running for the hills. I bet Paul Orndorff is the champion. No, Bollendorf is not the champion. And then, yeah, JR reiterate everything he heard. So Iron Mike Sharp, as we've mentioned over the past few weeks, he continues to look good here and really makes you wonder how far he could have gone if he wasn't just used as an enhancement talent of the WWF. Because every time we've seen him, he looks good. The fans are into him. His stuff is tight. He's a good enough wrestler. And I'm not saying he could have main evented with Hogan. I'm not even saying that, but if you look at, the people who could actually go in the WWF mid cards in the 1980s, and yes, ignore the Bret Harts, Dynamite Kids, of the world. You're telling me that Mike Sharp with a push in the mid card would have been worse than, a lot of the crap we saw in the mid to late 80s, even into the early 90s. It's not like, they could have gotten any worse with Mike Sharp in more of a pushed position there. Sharp used what it wasn't really a shoot backdrop, but I don't think Mike Boyer is aware that wrestling isn't real, as Sharp pretty much it looked like a freaking shoot to get him up in a backdrop, and then he threw him over the shoulder with the old Bruno Sammartino backbreaker and got the submission. Up next, tag team champions, Afa and Sika, the Samoan Warriors, accompanied by General Skandor Akbar, versus Junkyard Dog and Killer Carl Cox. 9-title match here with JYD and KKK teaming up to battle the champs. I didn't think Cox brought his trenching tool with him this week, but he did have it. We saw it earlier. And I know you'll be shocked to hear it, but this match was not a catch as catch can classic. But as we've mentioned before, and this seems to be the argument for a lot of the stuff that we see here in Mid-South, when you have a super over babyface like Junkyard Dog and a babyface who's over for some weird reason like Carl Cox, does it really matter if they can't go as well as some others can? And of course, the Samoans, we're getting to the point where Afa, I don't think he wrestles much longer. I could be wrong. But, Afa is not much longer for wrestling. And I know Sika had a little run in the WWF as a single in a few years. But they're closer to the end of their run than the beginning of their run, especially here in Mid-South. Anyway, by the way, the argument that when you have two super over baby faces, doesn't matter if you don't have a catch as catch kind of classic, that's typically the excuse when you see these Mid-South tag team matches where the heels don't usually get a lot of heat on the baby faces. They don't have, you're taught that in tag team matches, well, you got to beat down the baby face. You got to have a heat segment. You got to give the fans time to get behind, the baby face in peril. And that's not to say they don't do that. They have a brief heat segment, but especially in these Junkyard Dog tag matches, and we've seen a lot of them in the past 3 or 4 months. These Junkyard Dog tag matches, he may have the heat on him or his partner for 30 seconds at best, but it's a long shine at the start, and then at best you're getting a 4-way at the end that usually ends with Junkyard Dog standing tall. And ultimately, that's what happened here. And let's be honest, it's not like the fans didn't love it anyway. So Dog at one point randomly attacks Akbar through the ropes, and Afa, and I quote, used karate on Dog to take over. Where do you think these two Samoans who can't speak, can't do anything for themselves, where do you think they learned karate at? It's one of those things that's like, how does any of this really make sense? These two men, they're pushed as savages that can't work for themselves. They need managers. They need people to, lead them to and from the arenas, to and from the rings, to make business dealings for them because they don't speak English. However, they do understand tag team continuity. They understand that one man has to be standing on the apron and wait for a tag, and they learn karate at some point. These are things that make you scratch your head and go, why did people believe that this was legitimate? But literally, Boyd just kept saying over and over again that Alpha and Sika were using karate. Cox decided he was sick of all this karate going on, and we got our four-way in the ring. Cox got dumped to the outside, and we got a double team on the dog, which of course JYD overcame. He clotheslined both of them down and slammed Akbar. The referee got involved and tried to, settle things down, and the dog took the referee and threw him out of the ring. Cox brought in his truncheon tool and laid out both Samoans with it. The ref crawled back in, and did he disqualify the dog for throwing him out of the ring? No. Did he disqualify the dog for Carl Cox using his truncheon tool? No. Instead, he just counted to 3 and gave the pin in the non-title match here to Junkyard Dog and Killer Carl Cox. To paraphrase Mike Mills on booking the territory, the booking sometimes isn't airtight, brother. We go to commercial, we come back from commercial, and we have the one-man gang with General Skandar Akbar versus Terry Gibbs. And in a territory full of people who generally are on the lower end of the height thing, that most people tend to be between about 5'10" and 6'1", Reeser introduces gang as 6'10" tall. I've met one-man gang. If he's 6'10", I'm 6'6", and I am not 6'6". I've met one-man gang and I've met Satnam Singh. One of those two are really as tall as people say they are, and it's not one-man gang. Anyway, Boyd lists all the injuries that have been a credit to one-man gang, adding Ted DiBiase to the list along with Ernie Ladd and Dick Murdoch. I think they've also been putting Mike George in that list, even though Mike George is technically injured before One Man Gang made his debut here in Mid-South. And Gang won quickly with a big splash. We then get the Mississippi champion, Mr. Olympia, versus Tully Blanchard in a non-title match. Now, this is one of those matches that, it went exactly what you'd expect a match that I tell you in 2023 that Tully Blanchard was in went. It was a nice competitive match. However, this is the first really competitive match we've seen Tully Blanchard in, because up until now, he's mostly been used as enhancement talent, or just a step above enhancement talent. But this was a nice little 6-minute match here with the Mississippi champion, Mr. Olympia. We got a lot of back and forth. Non-title match, of course, because, you don't want to deal with, the commission of Mississippi somehow sanctioning a title match in Louisiana, even though it happens. We'll see plenty of those down the line. But Tully had some downtime after Orndorff kicked his ass earlier and was able to recoup. Olympia sent Blanchard flying with a hip toss, so Blanchard rolled to the outside to recoup. Back in the ring, he fared a little bit better. He tried getting out of an arm bar by slamming Olympia, but Olympia rolled through and kept the arm bar on. JR was trying to continue to commentate the match, but Boyd just randomly cuts him off mid-sentence at one point to talk about the one-man gang. Blanchard got a bit of offense here, so it was more than just an out-and-out squash. Boyd does tell us that Ernie Ladd will be here next week for the first time since his surgery on his knee that we saw here on television last week, because we need to have surgery on TV. Blanchard went for a suplex, but Olympia blocked it and hit one of his own. Olympia went for a big splash. Blanchard got his knees up. Later on, Blanchard made a cover and put his feet on the ropes, but the referee caught him. Tully argued with the referee, and Olympia small packaged him for the win in a nice little 6-minute match here, you know? Not something that if you haven't seen it, you need to go out of your way to see. But, you know, if you're going to watch the show, it's far from the worst thing you're going to watch on this show. And then because the show goes pretty quick, especially when they front load all of the interviews, Jesse Barr versus Rick Ferrero was up next in our expiration of time match. Let's go quickly to Jim Ross, who is telling us that this might be the last time we see him for quite a while here.
This will be one of the last times I'll be talking with you for quite a while. I'd like to come back as often as I can, but I want to say that Matchmaker Grizzly Smith, all the personnel of Mid-South Wrestling are doing a tremendous job, and especially you're doing a super job, and it's just it's great to be down here with you.
Jim Ross, it's our pleasure to have you with us, and this is a personal invitation. Anytime, don't wait for me to call you to come back. Anytime you can be here, you're always welcome. The fans really appreciate it. You have the inside information, you have refereed, you have announced, you have your own area programs and in other sports as well as professional wrestling. You're on the network with the professional rodeo, so anytime you can be here, the welcome mat is out. We appreciate your insight and coming with us.
I do appreciate that and hope to come back more and more often. Tremendous tackle there coming off.
So, yeah, Jim Ross tells us this is going to be his last time for quite a while. As a matter of fact, I don't think he comes back for another year. And this is every expiration of time match we've ever seen. Although, remember all those 80s WWF house shows that would start with the time limit draw between two jobbers? And especially when you watch it, when they used to put it on, you know, the WWE Network, and I'm sure it's on Peacock, all those old house shows from the 80s. That would start with a 15 or 20-minute time limit draw. And you're like, oh my God, can this thing just end so we can get to the good wrestling? You know, good, you know, theoretically speaking here. But, you know, it would have been so much better if they treated it like a Mid-South expiration of time match and it would just had a 3-minute time limit. Not that this was, you know, a barn-burning classic here, but, you know, if you're going to watch two enhancement talent, you know, square off, you know, I'd rather watch it for 3 minutes than 20. Let's be honest here. Next week, they do hope to have an update on Ted DiBiase's injury. They mentioned that hopefully it will not require surgery. But again, this is yet another injury at the hands of the one-man gang. Man, oh man, that guy is going through baby faces in this territory like, you know, a hot knife through butter. And of course, we end up with a 3-minute time limit draw. Jesse Barr and Rick Ferreira, there's no winner. And the show goes off the air without having a winner in this match. So that does it for Mid-South. You know, as for giving it a rating, and I haven't really given ratings to these shows a lot recently, since it's just been me instead of KJ, instead of with KJ. But if we're going to say that, you know, if say last week's show, in my opinion, last week's show is an easy 10 Ed Wiskowskis out of 10, I would say this week's show, you know, we had a good hot angle with Orndorff and Roop. You know, I would give this show 7.5 Ed Wiskowskis out of 10. You know, actually, no, I'll go better. I would give it a full extra point. I give it 8.5 Ed Wiskowskis out of 10. Because not only did we get that hot angle there with Orndorff and Roop, we also got that really solid match with Mr. Olympia and Tully Blanchard. You know, it was pretty good. Alrighty, so let's go now to Weird News of the Week. This is, of course, Weird News of the Week presented by nobody. And we go to UPI.com and our old friend Ben Hooper as we're taking down my neck of the woods. Entangled raccoon rescued from backyard hammock in Massachusetts. This is dated February 24th. Animal control officers in Massachusetts came to the rescue of a raccoon that became entangled in a resident's backyard hammock. Falmouth Animal Control said in a Facebook post that an officer responded to a home where a resident reported a raccoon had been stuck in their backyard hammock for about an hour on Thursday. The officer was able to help the little guy down and check him out to make sure he was in good physical health, the post said. and the raccoons were released back into the wild. I do have to tell you my own hammock story. Now, anybody who's ever taken a look at me knows that I'm a little overweight. I'm not gonna lie here. I've got a little bit of a stomach here. One time when I don't know, I was like 15-ish years old, I was at a friend's house and I was told to go lay in the unbreakable hammock that they had, and I'm like, I'm kind of big here. Back then I was kind of big, and they're like, no, like no one can break this hammock. It's an unbreakable hammock. Like, okay. So I go sit in it, lay down. It's a nice little hammock. It's comfortable. And I swung in it for a couple minutes, and then it broke. And I took a bump onto their porch. So yes, I broke the unbreakable hammock. And I thought about that here during our Weird News of the Week segment about the Falmouth Animal Control needing to be called to rescue a raccoon. But so that's going to do it for this week. Thank you all for listening. Like I said, please subscribe to us on your streaming service of choice. And we will talk to you again in 7 days.